the discussion of voter ID ever again. Because now you can force people to identify their medical
God,
history
that's
to
such a
try to get into a
horrible
restaurant in New
example.
York.
The reason why voter ID is stupid is because you failed to demonstrate voter fraud. If there was a significant amount of voter fraud, you would be an idiot to say that we don't need voter ID. Number two, I think a lot of people on the left are warmer to the idea of voter ID if you're actually willing to provide it for free federally, like the fucking vaccines are. And there's a pandemic that's killing people all across the world. We have a significant problem that is addressed by one and an imaginary problem that isn't even addressed by the voter ID thing. If we today were trying to make it so that every car had seatbelts, we wouldn't be able to do it. These motherfuckers wouldn't let it pass. I knew somebody that had a seatbelt on and they died because they were locked in their car and it caught on fire after a crash. I knew somebody that had a seatbelt, they got in a crash and they still died anyway. It's not effective. I knew 10 people that got in car accidents, none of them wore seatbelts, they got out just fine. In terms of who won, I guess, because that's always what people are interested in. Who won? These conservatives are crazy, but are they really more crazy than socialists? Well, conservatives are a huge group in the United States. Socialists are a very small group, so it's not like a good comparison. I'd say in general, liberals or Democrats are more sane than conservatives or Republicans. I would say that pretty easily. Those are the two groups I would compare.
Why don't we talk about what's going on with vaccine passports?
Sure.
We've seen in Sydney, for instance, they issued a lockdown. Enough people ignored it. They went out in the streets, and then this resulted in news articles saying chaos in Sydney. People aren't, they're not following the rules. The vaccination rate in Australia is ridiculously low. I think it's 18%, really, really low. Well, then they called in police, and there were big protests. Now they've actually deployed military. So I'm curious if either of you wants to jump in with your thoughts on mandates. What would happen if they came here, if you're for or against them?
Look, there are elements of mandates that I can agree with. We've already set standards for other things like the MMR vaccine, very basic standard vaccines that we expect everyone to get before they can go to school, travel. And I think for the most part that's worked. We've eradicated plagues from the world. I think we should be proud of that. With regards to COVID, since this is an ongoing pandemic, we need to focus on approaches that are effective and that don't ostracize or exacerbate tensions. With regard to the Australian situation, it's not something I'm extensively familiar with, but generally speaking, I don't think that cracking down on protests is going to be an effective way to incentivize people to get vaccinated. What's happening in New York might be, but my main issue with it is that I'm not entirely sure how they expect people to still have their vaccination card. I know that there's been some confusion from the beginning as to whether or not you should keep that. I know people have thrown theirs away. They made it too big for wallets. It just felt a little bit haphazardly planned from the forego, so that's unfortunate. Maybe they can find other ways to incentivize it, like for example in schools where they have a direct access to government records where they wouldn't have to use those little cards, That might be a little bit better. I guess we'll have to see.
Okay.
Well, I'm not saying you believe this, but some people on the left, I never want to hear about the discussion of voter ID ever again. Because now you can force people to identify their medical
God,
history
that's such
to
a
try to get into
horrible
restaurant in
example.
New York City.
Sorry, I have to pause whenever he says some dumb shit. The reason why voter ID is stupid is because you failed to demonstrate voter fraud, you fucking moron. If there was a significant amount of voter fraud, you would be an idiot to say that we don't need voter ID, okay? Number one. Number two, I think a lot of people on the left are warmer to the idea of voter ID if you're actually willing to, provide it for free federally, like the fucking vaccines are. The vaccines are literally fucking free, motherfucker, and there's a pandemic that's killing people all across the world. No fucking shit. Why would you ever compare voter ID to mandatory vaccinations? We have a significant problem that is addressed by one and an imaginary problem that isn't even addressed by the voter ID thing. So stupid.
Yeah, look, I'm not getting the vaccine, so I'm part of the 100 million people that are unvaccinated. And it's an experimental vaccine. The FDA and CDC has said that in January. It's questionably effective. Lindsey Graham just came down with COVID. You had a vessel, a ship in the United Kingdom, 100% vaccinated ship that came down with COVID. It's more like a treatment than a vaccine. I'll leave that conversation to Dr. Brett Weinstein if you really understand how that works. But yeah, this is medical apartheid. This is trying to create a two-tiered system where if you don't make the proper medical decisions, you're not able to go to Broadway shows.
We should have a two-tiered system in the United States. For people that want to shit in the street or walk around and piss all over fucking shops, there should be a two-tiered system for you. You going out and shitting and smearing your shit all over the fucking sidewalk in front of every other person just trying to walk to a coffee shop or walk to work is the same thing as you walking into a restaurant as an incubator for this virus, coughing and sneezing all over the place. There should absolutely be a two-tiered system for it. It is unbelievable that we're still fighting about this.
Or going to restaurants, even when the efficacy of this vaccine is questionable at best. We see that in Israel, an 85% vaccinated country that's about to lock down again. And most of the new cases are from vaccinated patients, not unvaccinated patients in Israel. So, sorry, you want to interject him, but
Yeah.
obviously against mandates, and I think people should be able to make their own medical decisions. I think it's pretty obvious.
Well, I disagree. I think we actually have a story on Timcast.com that our view of the lockdowns is that it's alarmism because a new study from the Public Health of England found the Pfizer vaccine is 96% effective after 2 doses at staving off the Delta variant, and AstraZeneca was 92%.
I could probably agree it's alarmism, but it's enough of an alarm for the public health leaders to undermine the argument that the vaccine is a solution to what would possibly satisfy the public.
So-
I mean, I was against the lockdowns in the first place. Let me be very clear when there was 1,000 deaths a day, not 334. But sorry.
If we today were trying to make it so that every car had seatbelts, we wouldn't be able to do it. These motherfuckers wouldn't let it pass. I knew somebody that had a seatbelt on and they died because they were locked in their car and it caught on fire after a crash. I knew somebody that had a seatbelt, they got in a crash and they still died anyway. It's not effective. I knew 10 people that got in car accidents, none of them wore seatbelts, they got out just fine. Like, dog, there are 330 million people or whatever in the United States. You can find a stupid fucking story for literally anything. I mean, fuck, you have a fan base.
Go ahead.
Well, a couple of points on this. First of all, it's experimental in the sense that there was an expedited process for its release, but there have been full and extensive studies taken on the safety and effectiveness of these vaccines. The reason why the FDA study hasn't been finished, the reason why it hasn't been fully vetted, isn't because they're looking for long-term health effects. It's because they're determining the extent to which it protects you over a long period of time.
Yeah.
Ergo, the fact of the matter is, by all available data, this is undeniably much safer to get the vaccine. I mean, by orders of magnitude.
Yeah.
Well, wait, a couple things, because you said a few things there. There are some instances where areas have more people being infected if they're already vaccinated, but if you take a look at, this is like data mining. If you take a look at the broader statistics, especially here in America, the number of people who have gotten breakthrough cases is something like 0.003% of people who have been vaccinated. You can take a look at the numbers. Where is this new wave exploding? It's in the unvaccinated. In spite of the fact that fewer and fewer people are remaining unvaccinated, the vaccinated stay relatively healthy. And not only do they get infected way less often, they also suffer far fewer severe symptoms. Their hospitalization rates have plummeted, and their deaths are incredibly low compared to people who are unvaccinated. This is by all means an effective vaccine.
What's your opinion of Johnson & Johnson, the FDA saying that it might cause a rare nerve disease?
Oh my
that's
God!
something
What about the rare side effects to the actual fucking coronavirus? Like, dude, what do you have to say about seatbelts that are too tight and maybe it can give you heart inflammation? Like, well, oh my God!
First of all, when you take a look at that, you have to recognize that even if that was the case,
Which the FDA says it is.
right? Well, they're looking into it, of course. It
No,
doesn't.
they've issued an official warning that it could issue a rare nerve disease. That's a big
Could issue, of course. They're looking into it, and that is something to look into and to be concerned about.
What's your opinion of VAERS, the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System?
hold on.
Where
Let's-
there's-
oh my
first,
God.
I'm just curious because this is.
Let's do the Guillain-Barré syndrome,
Yeah.
though. I think you want
Yeah,
to
so of course, stuff like that can happen. Now, even if that claim is the case, it would remain the fact that unless the extent of that potential nerve damage is just apocalyptically severe, that the effects of getting COVID would still be far, far worse than the potential side effects of that vaccine. However, if you were to say, let's say worst case, Johnson & Johnson, it's not viable, that gets pulled, we see what the consequences are, that doesn't really speak against the greater viability of the vaccines. I got Pfizer, for example. We're talking hundreds of millions of people who have either been protected against the vaccine in part, or if they get it, against the virus, or if they get it, their effects, their symptoms are much, much, much more
So I just
manageable.
want to just play into the irony here that I'm the one criticizing the pharmaceutical companies and you're the one defending. I just think
That's it.
I think it's delicious.
Well,
Wait, hold on. That's an
because
extremely
I
good-
actually hate these people so like hate. I have hatred. I have hatred for these people. This is a moment of national wrong. This is a moment of international actually wrong. This is a moment of intergalactic embarrassment. That if any of the radio waves that escape our planet before they make it into the indistinguishable background microwave radiation of the universe, if they happen to be picked up by some alien civilization, they will nuke our planet listening to people this fucking stupid. Like, holy shit.
dishonest talking
well,
point.
but
You're,
I'm
you're
not
peddling the
praising-
Pfizer vaccine. You're saying
I'm
it's
not-
so
well,
effective.
well,
So many
let's-
people
hold
have
on,
taken
let's-
it.
wait.
But I'm the one saying, hold on, maybe AstraZeneca, Moderna,
Charlie.
Johnson & Johnson, Pfizer.
This is
Let's talk about the points he's made. And
I think Vaush is better for this debate than me. I actually don't know. I don't know if I could be face to face with somebody like this and not lose my fucking mind. I wouldn't be able to do it. I think I would already be screaming, holy shit. Maybe it's because of my personal attachment to my mom not getting vaccinated because of this stupid shit. This is actually so unbelievably fucking stupid. Like, it actually is demonstrably harmful to the health of everybody, to everybody in the world. Not just the unvaccinated, but the vaccinated people as well. Because now, if by some chance in the future, some crazy new fucking theta, zeta, whatever fucking variant comes out, sigma variant comes out, and starts being like more able, more efficacious to infecting people that are already vaccinated, now I have to deal with your stupid health decisions. It is so fucking frustrating that we're not just through this shit already. Oh my fucking God.
I was just enjoying the irony.
Well, the thing is, it's not really like irony if you understand the issue at hand. See, my praise doesn't go to the pharmaceutical companies or their CEOs. It goes to the tireless workers who spend months and months and months developing these vaccines.
Who's getting rich
very big
from
fan.
this
Well, hold
vaccine?
on. Have I at any point praised the distribution or profiteering system
Who do you think
behind
gets rich
Pfizer?
from vaccine
So-
mandates?
Who's getting rich? Go look at their fucking stock. What do you mean? You're acting like these companies have gone up like fucking 20x the value. That's not how pharmaceutical companies work. Sorry.
This is
The workers or
this
the
is
Pfizer CEO?
Nobody's talking about who gets rich. This is a toothless.
Isn't that your whole
wait, hold on.
shtick?
This is a
Like,
toothless
workers'
critique that you
rights.
could.
Like,
let's
hold on.
try and go back and forth.
This is a toothless critique that you could apply to literally anything that you don't like. Everything in this country is manufactured to the profit
No,
of
but
CEOs.
we don't mandate it and say you can't go to restaurants if you don't get one of
Yeah,
four
so,
major
but if you're-
pharmaceutical
so let me-
medicines.
wait, I just want to say, if that's your criticism,
That's one of
then-
many.
Then you should. So if that's the criticism you want to focus on, I'm in favor of nationalizing the pharmaceutical industry. I'm willing to take it that far. But whether or not that's on the table, and I can't just make that happen. When we're talking strictly about the effectiveness of the vaccine, it seems to be effective. That's not a praise of the capitalist industry behind
No,
it.
I was just enjoying the irony. That's
It's
all.
not
So-
irony,
Well, it's totally ironic because I'm the one saying that they might be lying to us. And you're the one that's saying it's super effective.
Wait, what
Which
lie?
usually, if we were wearing our traditional uniforms, right versus left, it would be the other way around. That's all I'm saying.
The only comment
But
I'm making
What
is
do you have
that's
to say
the
about
effectiveness
VAERS,
of the
though? What do you have to
vaccine.
say about the vaccine adverse event reporting system that says well over 7,000 people experienced death after getting?
Okay, Vaush needs to start holding him down because Kirk is the hardcore gish galloping. I swear to God, his face looks like it was photoshopped. God damn it. Vaush needs to be holding him down on this. He can't because Kirk is just gish galloping all these garbage arguments. I think he needs to hold him to every single thing he says. Don't let him do this thing where it's like, oh, well, normally I'd be defending that and you'd be blah, 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 blah. That's bullshit. Even for socialists, that's bullshit.
In the vaccine, does that worry you?
The VAERS system is entirely self-reported. I don't think it's generally
Do you
used
think it's
for an accurate
underreported
metric.
or overreported?
With VAERS, it's almost impossible to say. You know what VAERS is, right? Can you tell me what VAERS
Yeah,
is?
VAERS is a government website that physicians or individuals can submit complaints or concerns after an adverse event report from a vaccine. Since you cannot win in court against a vaccine production company, then they go through some process where the government then can distribute some form of remedy if you had an adverse event reaction. That's what VAERS is.
And researchers like it because if you take a vaccine or you get some other procedure, any medical drug done, you can report the effects there, and it can be a way of gathering sort of aggregate data concerning the effects of these potential treatments. The problem is researchers don't use this as a bulletproof way of determining the outcome or effect of anything because they're literally just unvetted online submissions that anybody can put in.
So I
I
agree.
ask you because I want to know, how do you arrive at the conclusion that how many people did you say?
Well,
applied?
it's VAERS' own data is 7,000 plus, and most of which, by the way,
That anyone can submit.
No,
No, I'm asking
by the
how
way,
do you
most of
arrive-
which are physicians submitted. Just so you know, these
The
are
total number?
The most of the submissions on the VAERS website are done by like family doctors or local physicians. So I'm just asking, what number of adverse event reactions would you say maybe there's something wrong?
But I'm asking, how do you-
10,000 deaths.
how do you know these deaths were caused by
20,000 deaths?
vaccines?
No, I'm just saying that's what VAERS says, right?
No, wait, but so I need to know this.
We
because
don't.
You can, so
That's the
VAERS
question.
So wait, is these just people who have died after taking the vaccine? Like they may have died from some medical incident afterwards, and it just gets put up
This
there.
is
and
this
we're
is the
saying
question.
because of the
Usually, a
vaccine?
vaccine gets pulled when you have 15 attributable deaths. We have 7,000 that we have to go through. The question is, when you call time out
Wait,
and say maybe we
you're
should
not answering
mandate
the question.
it.
How do you know that they're from the vaccine?
We don't. That's the point.
Oh,
but you
okay.
don't either. But the position is let's mandate experimental medicine. We don't know actually what's
Well,
happening.
if you don't know, then how can you say that medical doctors are the one uploading?
I don't know the answer to this, but I feel like there's no way that's true. If there are 15 deaths reported on the VAERS site, they pull the vaccine. I'm without even having looked into this before. What they pull, my guess is it's probably more like something where they investigated or it's cause for further investigation afterwards. I seriously doubt that there's an anonymous reporting thing where you can just get a vaccine fucking pulled, but.
Information. Is there any methodology you're looking at?
We
to
do
determine
know
these
who's
deaths
actually
from it?
uploading it. We know that. We know the entries are usually
What are
and
the claims
typically
being made?
traditionally. How about menstrual cycle disruption, loss of nerve capacity, unable to walk, paralysis, miscarriages, mood changes? Also, you can go to the VAERS database like, oh, that's interesting.
Mood
I-
changes. What about the death?
Let me interject
Death
something
is
real quick.
7,000 plus. That's a serious
I
number.
wanna-
How do they know it's from the vaccine? I keep asking you this. You don't
Let me
answer.
address 2 points, one from each of you, real quick, so we can try and. How do we know it's from the vaccine? It's a difficult question. I would say that if you have a mass vaccination program which gives out 330 million doses or so, and then people start saying, "Hey, I got the vaccine, then this happened," VAERS isn't here to say it is or isn't. They're here to say, "Can we find a pattern in this?" And I think 7,000 suggests there may be one at the very least. I'm not a scientist, so I can't stress that. I will also say, however, to Charlie, Guillain-Barré syndrome, which I'm probably pronouncing wrong, it's a side
I
effect.
always mispronounce it.
Guillain-Barré. There you go.
Yeah, something like that.
My understanding is actually a side effect of many vaccines.
Yeah, it is.
And so
Totally, that's correct. It could be.
Well, so the issue I have is one of the things that Vaush brought up is that there's been, how many you mentioned, 100 million, 160 million? 115, I think it is, million.
Who have been fully vaccinated?
Fully vaccinated.
I think in that ballpark.
So, of
Maybe
course, if you have something very different from any other vaccination we normally do because
Yeah.
we're not having everyone do it all at once.
Yeah, so this is a mass inoculation thing. And so here's why the American system should answer this question easily. When you have any sort of uncertainty or disagreement, yield to rights.
So
Tim Pool honestly bringing out like the good points. This is a mass inoculation event. We don't normally vaccinate the entire country for one thing at a time. Arguably, maybe flu shots, but even at that, it probably isn't at the level of the coronavirus vaccination stuff going on here.
Should answer this question easily. When you have any sort of uncertainty or disagreement, yield to rights.
So-
yield to rights. Allow people to
so-
say no. Let me just build out the argument, right? So for me, for example, I'm 27. I don't consider COVID to be a largely disproportionate risk to my way of life. I don't know about this vaccine. I have gotten other vaccines in my life. So I want to be able to have the right to say no to that. So the American system, Constitution, kind of like the tradition, is to be able to have people have nuance, preferences and individualism when it comes to these sort of.
I'm sorry. My favorite thing in the world would be fucking Mexico starts getting more like more aggressive towards the United States, and there comes some point where like conservatives start spreading this idea that Mexico's gearing up to go to war with us, and you get all these Trumples like signing up to the fucking military that want to join so that they can go and kill people in Mexico or whatever. And fucking day 2 of basic, there's like 26 fucking nurses with fucking needles on a row, like ready to fucking like vaccinate the fuck out of you, and they can't do it. That's actually, they're like, holy shit, I was ready to go kill some Mexicans, but I don't know if I can do the vaccine thing. I gotta tap out of this one, chief. Like, if you were called to serve your country, like via a draft or something, which is, I guess to conservatives, like the most honorable fucking thing you could ever fucking do. Like, you would have to call it quits on day 1 or day 2 of basic or whatever, when you have to go and get your 26 fucking shots to make sure that you can travel abroad and not get sick to random shit.
Complex issues, not saying you can't go to a restaurant because we want you to take experimental medicine.
Right. So a couple of points on that. First of all, if we're speaking to legal rights, the Supreme Court found over a century ago that when it came to vaccinations, this was a special exemption from some people's rights to.
I will agree with you that the courts are not on my side.
1904 in that one. And there's a reason why, because of course, when you choose not to take the vaccine, you contribute to the removal of others' freedoms. See, it's true. You do have a freedom to not or to take a vaccine, but I think other people should have the freedom to not grow up in a world ridden by plague. And with the way this disease, COVID, mutates with time, as all diseases do, inevitably, if it continues to circle the world long enough, and this is an international problem, not just an American one, new strains will develop, which will slowly ebb at the effectiveness of this set of vaccines. So it threatens all of us. May I say one other thing? Sorry. With all of that being said, just to speak to VARS, VARS is an incredibly effective system for locating and roughly attributing concerns related to the effects of drugs. The problem is that there are several elements to this disease that make it really difficult to pinpoint anything specific. Second, the two of which being A, hundreds of millions of people vaccinated. That is a huge range to pull data from. And B, the propagandist fear campaign about an incredibly effective vaccine process that may lead people to misattribute
I just want to get a
death
clarification
to vaccines.
Sorry.
Just quick clarification. Are you for mandating the COVID-19 vaccine?
The same way we have other vaccines, like school, travel, that kind of stuff. Yeah.
So, like, what if someone want to go to a restaurant or something?
No, fuck it, go harder. That shit should be fucking mandated. Otherwise, you're locked up as a bioterrorist. Throw them in jail.
Or a movie theater?
I think that, we don't have that for other vaccines, right? Like every time you go to a movie theater, you have a little card. I understand that might be an effective panic measure, but long term, my goal would be to integrate it into the same revenue of vaccines.
I think that's a more reasonable response than some politicians. I'm just gonna be honest.
People are panicking.
No, I think that's a more.
Well,
yeah.
I just want to make sure we weren't having misunderstandings.
No, I think that's more of a reasonable answer. I just curious, just on the vaccine topic in general. Are you concerned by like Dr. Malone coming out, who literally invented the mRNA vaccine and says that there's a dangerous spike protein involved?
He didn't invent the mRNA vaccine. He was one of many researchers that worked on it like fucking 30 fucking years ago, dude.
Encourages people to.
This is like when people quote the guy. Is it James? What's the name of the guy? Like, this guy discovered the DNA, the double helix, and he's also a race realist. Like, so who the fuck cares?
We're getting it. Does that move you at all?
Well, you're free to speak with your doctor when it comes to.
No, Dr. Malone, just his specific commentary. The guy who invented this type of vaccine.
Well, I'm not a PhD, and I doubt that he was directly involved in the production of these.
No, he literally invented this.
The mRNA.
Oh, he didn't. Fuck, Vaush doesn't know this talking point. It's okay. I wouldn't expect him to know everything, but this is a super common talking point that this one researcher that worked on the mRNA shit in the fucking 80s and 90s or whatever, conservatives will cite him as like, oh my god, this guy's like, dude, who the fuck cares about this guy's opinion? Like, give me somebody more fucking relevant, please.
Like Johnson & Johnson, Pfizer,
But he's very, very.
This guy's acting like, oh my god, like this guy literally crawled through the fucking desert, like looking for ingredients. Like this guy twisted the fucking mRNA himself. Like this guy knows every part. Like this guy's been out of the industry for decades. Who the fuck cares?
Very aware of the sort of accelerated implementation. He's trying to call time out and tell people this is not like any other vaccine. Does that worry you? His claim is that it involves a spike protein. It was rushed to market. It's going to have side effects. You don't understand it like I did. I invented this. And you got to think twice before mandating it or even taking it if you're under a certain age. Does that bother you?
What makes the current retinue of vaccines that we take, the mRNA process, different from other mRNA
It doesn't involve the
vaccines?
spike protein. According to him, the same composition as like the measles, mumps, rubella type vaccine or the chickenpox vaccine.
Well, those weren't mRNA. The process wasn't developed back during the MMR vaccine.
Totally. But some of them are getting updated for the more mRNA type technology, right?
He wasn't involved in the production of these modern vaccines. How could he possibly have any comment on any of the rigors?
True!
Because he invented this type of vaccine. I'm just saying, does that bother you? Do you think he's just like a fear propagandist and like?
No, he may well have concerns, but those are concerns that I would rather have addressed by the scientific community rather than, with respect to you and myself, YouTubers.
Well, no, I agree. So, but the question is which scientists, right? So there's a lot of scientists speaking out against this. Dr. Brett Weinstein, Dr. Malone.
How about people that actually work on it, you fucking moron? How about I don't care about what fucking YouTube doctor quit his university because people too woke for him fucking Weinstein has to say on it. Why don't you like actually cite somebody fucking relevant?
Brett Weinstein.
He's an evolutionary biologist, so he knows a little bit about how.
That's not.
An evolutionary biologist knows about fucking vaccines, virology. Why would you think that? Like, what do you think evolutionary biologist means? You know about like anything that evolves? Like, oh my god, like I don't really know what I want to do. I have all my Pokemon at the Pokemon Daycare Center, and I don't know what the correct like IPs or whatever the fuck it is. But, oh, well, did you talk about Weinstein? He's an evolutionary biologist, and Pokemon evolved, right? He's a fucking expert.
cellular
No,
function
that
works.
is not virology. That is a completely spurious
So let me
position.
do you trust Fauci more or Dr. Brett Weinstein?
It's not about Fauci. It's about Fauci.
He's a virologist who's been wrong about everything.
It's about the global. Well, hold on. He's smiling with glee here. It's the global medical community in this regard.
You mean like the WHO?
Like, the fact that this guy would bring up Fauci, who's literally a fucking immunologist, and then compare it to a guy that, well, this guy's an evolutionary biologist. Yeah, no, I would fucking trust Fauci like a million times over somebody like Brett Weinstein. But not only that, I would probably just trust the scientific community at large, not like one or two like hand-picked examples of people that aren't even in the industry right now.
No, hold on. Wait,
put a name behind it,
He's,
though.
wait, he's very excited.
Yeah, let's-
I just want to say, it's not just about the WHO. We are talking about a unified effort on the part of virtually every country on Earth to get a hold of the vaccines that us Americans are privileged to have. This isn't some like pharmaceutical Dr. Fauci push that wasn't broadly supported by any of the relevant experts. In the mRNA field, which is not huge because it's a very new development, internationally, there is a demand for these vaccines.
I wanted to add, just based on what you had said, I can pull up Reuters. Their fact check is that the vaccines are not, quote, cytotoxic. They go on to mention that Robert Malone, and they show the Brett Weinstein podcast, they show the post. The FDA was alerted months ago that the spike protein in the COVID vaccines are cytotoxic, toxic to cells. The FDA did nothing. Reuters says this is not true. Now, the issue at hand is trust. Like you mentioned, you said, do you trust Fauci over Weinstein? I don't know if there is a fact-based argument if you have the doctors you trust and the doctors you trust.
You don't trust anybody. Why doesn't anybody know anything about how any scientific process works? Nobody. You don't look to one scientist and get your information from them, right? You look at a claim and then you see if there's any peer-reviewed published research or at the very least a fucking preprint about it. That's how this works. Nobody. When somebody asks like a professor, like, oh, like what is this? Blah 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 blah. You go, oh well, let me go and see on Twitter what like leading scientists said about this thing. Like, oh my god, like, oh, so I defended my PhD yesterday. Oh, it was so hard because doing the Twitter citations was like really difficult to like, wait, you mean you look at the research, right? If something that Fauci says or this other guy, the inventor of mRNA, if they said this thing, then point to the research that supports it, not their individual fucking opinion. Point to the research. I wouldn't trust anything that Fauci says without pointing to the research either. Like, Jesus.
For the organizations you trust, it's a clash of who you believe to be honest.
None of us have the credentials to just come up with these arguments on their own. There will always be bias in who we choose to believe. However, given the plurality of people seem to support the safety and the effectiveness of the vaccine, and the fact that it doesn't take a virologist to notice that over 500,000 Americans have died of COVID, more than the combined death tolls of every war since World War I combined, including the Second World War in Vietnam. Those are things that I don't need to be a virologist to see.
Can I ask you a question,
That's
though?
pretty bad.
One of the issues that's brought up frequently, especially on Twitter, is that many of these COVID deaths are died with COVID. As it's brought up where people would say something like, it tends to be people who are over 70 or things like that. I'm only bringing that up not to make the argument, but because you said, how would VAERS know if these are actually related to the vaccine?
I'd love to respond to that if I may.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
COVID rarely, like directly kills you. Like age, it causes a breakdown in other vital functions that then their death can be attributed to such. So for example, of the many things that people die, it's not really COVID, it's just that COVID blanks their entire system internally and eventually something fails, something breaks and they die. There were people claiming that there were deaths being spuriously attributed to COVID-19 very early on in this pandemic, but thankfully we know that's not the case because if you take a look at the excess mortality numbers, the number of people who should die every year in the United States, because there's a very normal pattern, normally with this many people in this country, we see an excess starting when COVID started. That
It's like if AIDS was around today, like it used to be, like how can you really attribute that death to AIDS? Like, what are the opportunistic infections usually caused? Like, no, does anybody really die of AIDS? Like, well, that guy had a different type of infection. Actually, well, that guy had an infection of a really common bacteria that's found in the stomach. Like, oh, that guy actually had an infection. Did AIDS really kill anybody? Like, oh, well, fuck, you win the argument. Technically, no, AIDS doesn't really kill fucking anybody. Like,
almost perfectly graphs on to the rising death waves of COVID. I mean, it perfectly tracks onto that.
I just want to say for you, Charlie, I think, the issue I see here is, for me, I can't trust or distrust. I don't know. I think Brett Weinstein's a very smart guy, and I don't think he's going to lie to me, and these doctors are very smart people. Then I see the government agencies that, I don't always trust the government, to be completely honest. I'm not a big fan. But to believe that there's like a nefarious effort or anything like that, ultimately what it comes down to is, in my opinion, having a trusted medical professional that you can consult with.
Well, I totally agree. I think there could be an argument that if you're over the age of 70, that this vaccine might be a really good idea for you. However, to mandate it for schools and for colleges, when these are highly complex medical decisions, that's where I'm going to push back against it.
Well,
They are
the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is not an mRNA vaccine, though. That's my understanding?
I don't want to speak out of turn.
I believe so. I would love to be fact checked on that.
I'm not totally sure.
My memory's
So
something.
I guess another question I have, what do you think of alternative type treatments, hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin? Why the push for mass inoculation?
Well, because hydroxychloroquine studies have found it largely ineffective. There was, I believe, a French study that stopped when people started dying of heart failure. I think the only reason the right dies in the cells is because Trump mentioned it.
oh, that Raul dipshit.
The vaccines are the effective
Is
way-
Charlie still pushing hydroxychloroquine? Even Trump jumped off that shitty fucking train.
mass populations inoculated. And while it is true that most of the people who die are ancient, the fact remains that people experience long-term side effects from getting COVID, even if they survive. I know people who are in their 30s, and me, a blistering 27-year-old myself, I'm not especially worried, but I've heard them talk about how much harder it is for them to climb up flights of stairs. I know that erectile dysfunction, fellas, is one of the listed potential side effects of getting COVID, even young, healthy, no other problems. It is true that death is most comorbid with age and pre-existing conditions, but still, and that's not even to speak of the COVID variants. I mean, right now you're on, Delta? But if it keeps cycling around the world, let it go for another year. Who knows how bad this could get?
So Johnson & Johnson is not an mRNA vaccine. So there's an alternative.
I thought
mRNA.
the only two mRNA ones, I could be wrong, but I thought it was just Pfizer and Moderna right now. I might be wrong.
If you're concerned about it.
There was some guidance with the nerve disease with that. Sorry to interrupt.
I do think we kind of overlooked something really interesting is that when did we mandate vaccinations in public schools?
Well, I know the Supreme Court case concerning this was in 1904, so I would know it would have to have been earlier than that. I know that Washington even had his troops vaccinated, though. For
smallpox.
Yeah. Smallpox, was it?
Yeah.
Which is pretty crazy to think
Inoculated, not yeah, you're right.
Well, I don't know what they did, hit people with a rock and then
It was like a needle, I think. And they would prick you with the needle. They had like a weakened sample.
And they would have had to forge that needle, like with a blacksmith. Isn't that crazy to think about? Like Washington's, like
I know,
Why did he? What? The difference? Like a vaccine inoculates you. Why did he? Inoculation just means you have an immunity to something. No, like why did he stop? Am I missing something there?
Someone pouring it and then today it's just a machine that makes it.
That's just wild to think about.
Well, so man, I think the real issue for the most part is just mandatory.
Well, I just also have another question. Do you think that there might be any bad motives behind these 4 companies, AstraZeneca, Moderna, Pfizer, and Johnson & Johnson, considering they are big pharma and they pursue profits, which generally, as a libertarian socialist, you're skeptical of? Do you think maybe they might have nefarious motives?
Oh, their intentions are reprehensible. They have for many years made money off the backs of American deaths. The opioid crisis is almost entirely attributable to them.
And the Sackler family.
Yeah, I mean, no moral love for these companies. If this could be, and by the way, the mRNA process was developed through public funding. It was, an effort invested in by the collective good, something I'm generally supportive of. When it comes to these companies themselves, and when I say, go get your Pfizer vaccine, whatever, please do not mistake this or anything else that I say for an endorsement of the practices of these companies. It is only for cruel twist of fate and the economic system we live in that they were the ones put in a position to handle this. But it was the workers of those companies, not the CEOs who did the work.
So I know that this isn't as popular a thing to do, but this would be a moment where I would try to reclaim some form of American exceptionalism here, because I think you can do it. Because technically, we jerk off American accomplishments. We were the first people to nuke somebody. I don't know if people like that. First people to make it to the moon. Arguably, we invented the internet. Like, there's a whole bunch of really cool American stuff. Why not claim the fucking mRNA shit as like an American thing? Like, bro, like, why you attack? Like, arguably, the United States, or at least U.S. companies, like, founded like a revolutionary type of vaccine and were able to mobilize this like 1 year from the discovery of an infection. That's an amazing accomplishment. That is an amazing accomplishment, and you should be proud of that as an American. Like, what do you mean? Why are you upset that like a private company did this? Like, are you the socialist now? Do you think all of it should be like socialized or expropriated, and the government should do this research on its own? Like, I think you should just own that as. And for everybody who wants to say like, oh, well, actually, it was BioNTech, it was a German company. That motherfucking company was about to go fucking bankrupt until Pfizer came in and bailed it out, okay? So don't fucking start on me on that bullshit. Everything works around the world, and there's a whole bunch of capital investment that goes on everywhere, okay? It was Pfizer and BioNTech. It was not fucking BioNTech on its own, and Germany does not get credit for that shit. Suck my fucking dick.
I'm just curious, does that ever make you stop short and say, maybe they're trying to massively inoculate us on a vaccine that might not be as effective to try to pursue profit, not well-being? Does that ever like enter into your
It's a consideration you should take about anything produced by any company that's run for profit, which is everything. Basically every need in American society is tempered by the knowledge that there are people out there who are paid very large salaries to sell it to you. This is the case for everything we eat. Every time you run down Main Street, or in my case, I guess, the boulevards in Los Angeles, you're seeing the protracted efforts of $1 billion industry to make sure you want things they're selling. Could that be the case for COVID? Undeniably, there was a profit incentive involved. Oh my goodness, I'm sorry. And there was probably a protracted effort on the part of these companies to make sure they were the first. And they probably took every dirty advantage they could. With the data available, I have to still, much as I would say,
I think that's way too many concessions. I think that I think that the argument is there are, I don't want to get into it. There are a lot more better arguments than that. I think that's way too many concessions to this dipshit.
Prefer eating McDonald's food to starvation. I have to say, this is probably still something we should be doing.
You want to do? I don't want to stay. It's been 20 minutes.
No, for sure.
Do you want to make a final point?
Maybe you would starve.
I actually think this has been really constructive and not like that.
What about I wish I remember the names of these companies, but there were like 3 or 4 other massive pharmaceutical companies that tried to make mRNA vaccines and failed. What about them? Why didn't they just rig the data? Why didn't they just grease the wheels at the FDA? Why didn't they just bribe somebody to get that shit done? Like, this was a very, very complicated manufacturing process. GSK was one. Yeah, like there were other huge companies that tried to get on this and weren't able to do it. Like,
inflammatory. I think that deep down you have this kind of urge that I'm already there, where maybe they want this thing to go on for another decade to go make another $100 billion. And maybe the cheap drug of hydroxychloroquine or ivermectin might work better than they might think.
I don't have that urge.
If you look at all the money in society that can be made by companies, do you think that the desire for pharmaceutical companies to get a few point bump on their stock is going to outweigh the trillions of dollars of capital interest that exists around the world? Like, even if we did, let's say for one moment, we lived in the Deus Ex fucking world that Charlie Kirk lives in, where the pharmaceuticals are like these big, bad, expensive bullies. They're like, we're going to make this shit go on so that we can make all this money. If in that world, the fucking Amazon ninjas would be assassinating everybody at the pharmaceutical companies. The fucking Walmart warriors, okay? The tyrannical Target fucking T-Rex robots would be out there like destroying all of these pharmaceutical companies to protect their own profits. Why would you pretend that just one small industry, relatively large, but compared to like everything else, is going to somehow like destroy the entire fucking world market just for their minuscule profits? Like, come the fuck on.
Other studies would disagree with you earlier. We could change the topic. I just think it's
so.
That was a healthy discourse.
Can I meet in the middle on that one, on that very last one? I do not trust the pharmaceutical industries, though the available evidence does seem to point to the effectiveness of the vaccines. I say this: nationalize the pharma industry. Seriously, it could be used for the collective good, and I would unironically actually trust it more in the hands of our ineffective, bloated government than I would the sociopaths who run it currently.
So I'll wrap this up by saying, always talk to your doctor. This is one of the biggest things. Like YouTube is very strict on this, especially. But I genuinely think this is the right answer. If you're watching this, don't assume anyone here is right or wrong. I mean, I'm sure there are people who think Charlie's made a bunch of good points, and you have. Ultimately, it's down between you and your doctor. And I'll stress, for whatever your opinion, Charlie, I understand. Hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin haven't been approved by the FDA, and so that's just another.
We're just asking questions whether it works or not.
So that's why I think it's really important. Because
Just
I think
asking questions.
People have been eating horse paste that they sell. I looked up what the FDA says about it. They say do not do this, and they actually give a very good reason. They say although people are claiming that if an animal can take it, someone else can. That's not true. There's some things that dogs can't have that humans can. So please talk to your doctor. And I definitely hope we can continue having debates about this stuff because that was vastly important. I'm really glad you guys were able to.
I hadn't even heard of the horse paste thing.
Yes.
Ivermectin is technically a drug for horses. It's off-label use.
Oh.
Yeah, it's a dewormer, and so you can go to like Tractor Supply and they have a sign that says like do not eat this and please.
Any drug for horses will burn a human out from the inside. Those
Like
things
my-
are you've been here. They're titans.
So let's talk about the other big topic, critical race theory. That's the one that I had a terrible answer, absolutely, when you asked me about it, and it was because I think my approach to it was too surface level cultural. So the last time we had Vaush on, when you asked me about it, I couldn't give you a good answer. And I think we can talk about what's happening in schools, the things they're teaching children, and I don't know if either of you has an opinion and wants to start off with.
Floor is yours.
Yeah, so there are two CRTs. There's the critical race theory that I know of, which is a highly esoteric, essentially elective class that you can take in some law schools that teaches you a variety of incredibly eclectic legal theories some of which I like and some of which I think I disagree with. And then there's the critical race theory that people like Christopher Rufo have been trying to push, a sort of catch-all term to describe all anti-racism. We see these anti-CRT bills being put through state legislators, and a lot of them don't even mention critical race theory. They mention stuff that's been boilerplate anti-racist theory for like 2 centuries. That stuff really concerns me. I think that academia is to an extent sacred. Of course, all the good things in our society now were born in the halls of academia. The Enlightenment, our democracy, the fair trial that we enjoy if we're arrested. These were things that were originally considered to be the crackpot initiatives of academics, and only through the respect of those ideas have we arrived at, well, what we have today. So if there are problems within academia, I would have them solved in academia, not through the big hand of government reaching in and censoring everyone who says something that disagrees with some political party.
So a point of clarification: you don't believe that critical race theory is in schools?
I think that maybe there are
Be
ideas
careful.
which overlap with critical race theory, but there's always going to be overlap between academic ideas. I mean, I drank water, so did Hitler. One of those type of situations.
Oh God, you got to be so careful because he's gonna bash you over the head with like 4 or 5 different examples of where there are small districts across the United States implementing the shit that they call inspired by critical race. Dude, that math curriculum that we read was so fucking cringe. I don't know if I would ever do a public debate like with somebody like this defending CRT. It is such a hairy topic. You would have to be a debate lord, rhetoric master to navigate the minefield that is this fucking garbage. Like holy shit.
I think you're coming at it in good faith, where you're technically correct here that the super academic way of defining critical race theory is not being taught to 4th graders, right? With that being said, it's almost like saying, we're not teaching advanced geometry to 4th graders, but we are teaching them, very basic math, right? We'll get them the Euclidean geometry. So the very basics of this are definitely in schools, and there's many examples of this, right? The National Education Association literally came out in their press release and said that they are going to push for, and their word was critical race theory. Just so we're clear, they use that term, right? That's not Christopher Rufo, that's not James Lindsay, who are good friends of mine. That's the National Education Association, right? And I think they might even be talking about something different than the Delgado theory of critical race theory, right? And so what I want to try to do here, Tim, is we can talk about critical race theory as an academic theory, or we could use a filler term like wokeism, which is more like racial justice, which I actually think would probably be, we can call it racial justice and meet in the middle.
I mean, I really feel like there are probably 4-digit number of people in America who are studied on actual critical race theory,
and
not including myself.
And I'm not even prepared to do that, but I'm happy to talk about racial justice education and wokeism, which I think
that's what the discourse is centered on.
Well, I think you guys actually agree in essence that the academic critical
Oh
race
my God, Vaush is actually lucking out hardcore here if he's not ready to hit him over the head with a whole bunch of like CRT examples. So.
theory is there's overlap with a component in schools, but what we often hear is someone will say critical race theory is being taught to my kids, and then someone will say cite one author of critical race theory that we brought up in school, and the issue is we refer to it as I believe it's called critical race praxis. So this is something different than critical race theory. It's being implemented in education. But that's why I said wokeism. And
I just think that discussion is so unhelpful when Joy Reid and Christopher Rufo are screaming at each other, and Joy Reid is saying like it's not being taught anywhere. Christopher Rufo, so yes it is. When in reality they're both right. They're just talking about two completely different things.
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying?
No, I do. And Christopher Rufo has admitted this is like a kind of tactic. Critical race theory does sound spooky. I get a little shiver when I say it. Whereas stuff like anti-racist theory or structural racism maybe compel a little bit more thought when discussed on. It's kind of a moral panic that, in principle, I really disagree with. But if you want to talk, we can call it wokeism if you want. That's probably a more accurate term.
Yeah, I will just say to the point about Christopher Rufo, white supremacist is also used as a catch-all term in the other direction.
If we're talking, in academia, the term white supremacist is virtually never used. It's sort of a common parlance.
What I will say though about to give credit,
I would be careful because in a lot of CRT like stuff that we've gone over, that white supremacy shit seems to be littered everywhere. But Charlie Kirk might not know that.
to Christopher Rufo is that this is all kind of downstream from the conversation that Marcuse and Delgado started.
Yeah,
it really is.
Well, let's talk about that. But just one thing though, since we're operating under the blanket wokeism, which is a really broad term, let's talk about like specific ideas because I'm sure there are some of them that I can provide a good defense for, and some of them
So
I
like,
might
how about like
disagree with.
black-only dormitories?
Generally not a fan. I don't think they're like explicitly harmful in the same way that traditional segregation is, but I also think that it incentivizes bad types of socialization, where the way that you get a reprieve from the faults of society is to find comfort in people of your own race. Maybe that incentivizes some bad stuff. In my university, we had safe spaces, but you know what they were? They were like chilled, like coffee break rooms behind like
Where'd
the
you go?
Latin. I went to Humboldt State.
Okay.
And right behind there, and like anyone could go in there, whatever. Just the only thing that they asked was that you not be like a dick. But as long as you met that qualification, that was fine. That to me, that's a good safe space. Maybe that works.
So just had to go through more.
Go for it, please.
So
No, hit me.
I think this is actually really helpful. So how about reparations for slavery?
I think I'm pretty in favor of that. Yeah.
Okay, make the argument.
Just an owed debt. We said 40 acres and a mule. We never paid it. And unfortunately, the material reality for a lot of people who were slaves didn't change that much after they were emancipated. I mean, if you were a slave and you're made free, that's a big step up, don't get me wrong, but you have nothing. I mean, nothing. And because of the way generational wealth transfers from father to son or mother to either to anyone to the children, caught me there. Unfortunately, we still see the consequence of that borne out. You can actually look county by county. Where were slaves kept? Which were the plantation counties? And you see, oh, this group of black like neighborhoods, that's where they settled after slavery ended. It's like really immediate stuff, and it's a debt owed that this nation never paid.
I don't necessarily agree on reparations, but I think we need to clarify what that ultimately means. But I will say I've long held the same position. I actually worked on a documentary. There's an issue of people who were enslaved, then they were released, and they were not given any means to actually develop and grow. And so there's a generational wealth gap between people based on race for these historical reasons. The challenge I see, I suppose, is, we've done a lot to amend the laws and change them. For instance, redlining and blockbusting have become illegal, and now we're dealing with an ultimately, I believe, is a class issue. Of course, racism still exists. But anyway, I digress on that point. What I wanted to get to is specifically on reparations. What do you view reparations as? More importantly.
So this is a big divide. Some people think like cash payments. I'm not a big fan of that. It doesn't fix the problem, for one. It's if you can put money into that community, but there's been research done on how long a dollar stays in a black neighborhood as opposed to a white neighborhood. And if a black neighborhood, all of the businesses are owned by, corporate boards that are all majority white, eventually the money filters out and you get a very temporary boost in living situation, not much long-term structural change. I'm a big fan of structural reparations, not based on race, but rather based on targeting neighborhoods that need it the most. Some of these neighborhoods are like white. I passed through some of them on my way out from Ronald Reagan Airport. I can tell which parts of this country, you can see it in the bones of the neighborhood. And I think that a new proper reparations project, a new deal even, would go a long way. Get some
so you're
workers
saying
out
not
there.
even based on race?
I think that we should recognize that this is largely a racial project because, unfortunately, poverty and race are really intertwined in this country. But in terms of applying it, I think that it would be much more healthy if we treated it like a collective effort to bring up the lowest sort of echelon of our economic.
So I want to ask you,
Yes.
Charlie, would you agree with a program that was in how do I describe this? Explained as reparations, but was not based on race, went to people based on class and neighborhood, so that it could help Latinos and white people and Asians and everybody?
First of all, I'm against reparations. I just don't like the word because it kind of implies this intergenerational type guilt or allowance that I kind of reject, and I'm happy to build that out further. Do I agree that the question is mostly class? Oh, absolutely. And I think that Vaush is hitting on something, and I think that you're saying that it's inherently racial. I really want to explore that with you because I think that's interesting. I think you're wrong, but I think that's interesting, where I think the racial thing is actually being used to distract people like you and I from actually talking about what's really happening here, which is a small group of people getting a lot richer while normal people get poor. And I think the racial thing is being used as this distraction tool to throw smokescreen in the middle while we're talking about something that we're never really going to have consensus on, when the true struggle right now is mainly economic.
Yeah, well, I think that applying reparations along racial lines runs into a bunch of really tough issues. Which neighborhoods? Do you go by like blood? Like, can you prove your great-great-grandfather was a slave? It gets very difficult very quickly. Maybe that would be the most direct interpretation of generational reparations. But in my mind, the reason why it's important to recognize the racial issue here is that the nature of class divides in this country is cut into racial policy prior to the Civil Rights Act. The redlining that took place, lines which still remain not in law but in practice, led to very distinct, sometimes, one side of the highway is nice and the other side of the highway, it legitimately
Can I
looks
just
like
jump in real quick?
Uh-huh.
I'm from Chicago. 47th Street was split by race. No joke. This has long-standing effects on the city. Just to point out.
No, and I grew up in LA, and on either side of the 5, which cut through the city, or the 405, sorry.
Let me
right
just
there.
interject something too, and I don't know if you're familiar. We were actually told that we would be arrested from the south side of 47th. If we crossed 47th, we would get arrested because the cops would pull up and say, "You don't live in this neighborhood. What are you doing here?"
I'm from the suburbs of Chicago, so I've heard stories like that. I think it's very clear to say I'm not from Chicago.
I grew up in Beverly Hills, which is close, though, to West Hollywood and Koreatown, and the lines are clear as day. The reason I say that, though, about like the racial project, is that because explicit discrimination is no longer in the law, we've pretty much wiped that out, with the exception of some, I guess, edge cases. The project of systemic racism, or the existence of systemic racism, is something which is carried through class by inertia. It isn't something you can explicitly legislate along anymore. Obviously, nobody's out there passing laws like black people can't do this. That'd be silly. But instead, the consequences of slavery and of second-class citizenship for black people left unaddressed, a wound left to fester that, unfortunately, can't really heal itself inertially unless we do something specific.
So the issue with that argument is that the more that we intervened in the black community, it actually had the opposite effect. And Thomas Sowell probably has done the best research and literature
The
on
Sowell,
this.
the
You
argument.
can laugh all you want. He's got a lot of credentials.
I wasn't trying to besmirch.
He's a very thoughtful thinker, and he actually lived through this, right? He lived through the Black Renaissance in the 40s and the 50s, where redlining was a legitimate problem. So was yellow lining, by the way, against Italians and against Jews. Nowhere nearly as bad, but there were other degrees of discrimination based on ethnicity and cultural background. And the black community, especially, you know, the area really well in the south of Chicago, right near the Chicago stockyards, the black community almost had this rallying cry where they were being discriminated against everywhere, and they kind of collectivized their purchasing power, and they saw their incomes increase actually at a higher rate than white Americans in the 40s and 50s and early 60s. You've heard this argument many times, and you probably, you know, disagree with it, but it's just true, is that the moment that we all of a sudden de-emphasized fathers being in the home and subsidized fatherlessness, we saw all these other trends increase. So in the right before the Civil Rights Act passed, about 24% of black children were born without a father. Now it's upwards of 70%. You guys can look at the Washington Examiner. It's 77%. Let's say it's 65%. So something has to explain that 40-point increase.
May I?
Yeah, just let me finish.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, and it's not necessarily that America got more racist. It could be the cocaine thing, which, you know, is a common issue. It could be, you know, operations of all these things. But a 40-point increase, I would point to a culture of fatherlessness, really bad government-run public schools, and then subsidizing behavior that isn't good.
So there are a few things that I can agree with you on. First of all, having two people in your house to raise you is pretty much essential. You absolutely
Glad
need
we
to.
agree.
This is undeniable. While I don't believe in shaming single parents, even if their single-parentedness is a
I agree
product
with
of
that.
bad decision-making, it's still good. It's in this economy, one parent, honestly.
Yeah.
But with that being said, there has been research shown that the rate of black fatherlessness is somewhat over-exaggerated, in large part because that number only applies to married fathers.
Yes, that's
so
true.
Husbands raising their children. It turns out when you account for unmarried black couples taking care of their kids, the numbers actually rise to those I think just below white couples. I think there was an article on that. I don't know if I saw it in Vice, but it tracks back to some really big study that was done back in
Temple's looking it up.
2016.
I hear him typing.
So that's one point. But you are right. There are perverse incentives. For example, many welfare stipulations cut off with a shared income, which is only a few $1,000s per year higher than the necessary cutoff for the single income. Meaning that if you're a single mom, you can apply for the welfare just fine. But then if you get married or otherwise file jointly, you go above the cap for welfare. This is a horribly designed program, undeniably, and it incentivizes bad, destructive behavior. The best thing that we can do, we restructure the welfare system in this country. Welfare is good for us. It is. I don't benefit from it. No, I don't think either of you benefit from it, I'm guessing. But we do collectively downstream from the increased economic potential of people who now have the money to afford daycare, proper childcare, get an education. In the long run, people in this country being richer enriches all of us. It's a mutual project. So we work on that. We find out what works and what doesn't, which welfare programs function, which don't, which types of economic revitalization function and which don't. And I legitimately believe that if we applied this country has the bones to be just a permanent economic beacon on the hill, just like a shining example to the rest of the world.
I agree with a lot of that. The bigger issue with the racial thing is that when you put some of these factors in even to present data, it doesn't pan out on racial lines, right? And this is where I think you'll agree, because you just said two parents in the home is a good thing, which we totally agree on. I think that's the ideal. Everything shows that is something that we should, you know, push for.
Three parents, maybe. Getting even better.
Oh, yeah.
50%.
Yeah,
Hope
polyamorous
it works
relationships.
that way.
Yeah.
Not a fan.
Based.
But I will say that if you look at the data from the government, that a white child being raised by a single mother is less likely to succeed by 10 independently picked metrics than a black child being raised by a mother and a father. And so maybe it's less about the skin color and more about the removal of parents and specifically fathers in the homes. Now, if you want to talk about a domestic Marshall Plan to go put fathers back in the home regardless of skin color, I will sign up for that in a second.
With the right welfare, the right systems, I think people will.
Oh my God, a really good question. Okay, Charlie, would you be in favor of rolling back policies related to the war on drugs in order to encourage like black fathers in the home and not arresting people and ruining their lives over like marijuana? I wonder if he'd do it. I don't know what Charlie's position is on that. He might actually be in favor of that.
Tend to their own families.
But that would then all of a sudden de-emphasize what you said earlier, where it says it needs to be on racial lines, right? I say no, it needs to be on nuclear family lines.
Well, no, I think that the neighborhood revitalization should just be on like a sort of class assessment. I think that when we recognize this problem, though, there are so many trends when it comes to poverty that involve the discussion of race, and there are some which do not. There are some types of poverty, some effects that are just ubiquitous and equally felt. But with regards to, say, black people, the fact that they couldn't get loans to purchase homes for a very long time. I mean, there were people living who couldn't do this. The fact that they didn't benefit from the Marshall Plan, if I remember correctly, after World War II.
Well, Marshall Plan was you're talking about the GI Bill.
Oh, sorry, the GI Bill. My apologies.
Let me just point out all these white guys that have a debate over the black community, huh?
I just think that there is a lot of economic inequality. A lot of it's tied to race, but we don't need to turn this into some weird blood quantum issue where we go tracking down every black American and holding them under a microscope to see whether they get benefits.
Now,
we just need to tend to our own.
This is where we kind of got off critical race theory very quickly.
I forgot about that.
I want to bring it back.
We're agreeing way too much, Tim.
All right.
No, because this is one of the issues I see, right? You see these conversations around, I don't know how you describe it because it's a variety of things. Wokeism is typically a catch-all term for some kind of ideology that involves anti-racism, which involves critical race theory, critical race praxis. And you're seeing in schools specific curriculums where they say to kids like, we had a book here. Mm-hmm. We had a book brought to us by one of these parents who's been going to these schools. And it was an anti-racist curriculum workbook where it asked it asked children why they thought that black children felt bad about their skin color. Now, I take issue with those things. They had another book where it was a little girl yelling at her mother saying, "You're lying to me about race." And then there was a whiteness contract with a devil tail coming out of it.
Okay, I saw that one.
Yeah, these are in schools.
Yeah, okay, so the whiteness devil tail thing, I saw that. That's indefensible. Yeah. I'm not going to stand at that. With regards to that, what was it? Why do you think black folk feel bad about their skin?
And I'll be careful because I don't have the book in front of me. Mm-hmm. It was something to this effect. It was a bunch of questions where it would ask you things like that and then ask you to answer. What have you done to make someone based on their skin color behave or whatever and things of that nature?
I think these are conversations that are worth having. I wonder, with regards to what you're saying, do you know what grade level these were at?
I think she mentioned the woman. It was Asra.
Yeah, Asra.
I think 4th grade.
Yeah, that's what I heard.
But I got to be honest, the anti-racist one didn't have any pictures or anything. It was just questions, and I think she mentioned it was in a 3rd grade. What was it called? What was the book called about the whiteness contract? The one you said was indefensible. That one was like a little girl who looked to be about 8 years old. So
yeah, I saw that online.
Can I ask a question? Mm-hmm. So let's go to just piece,
yeah, sure.
issue by issue. Ibram X. Kendi, who's kind of one of the, archangels of the wokeism movement.
Beloved figure in the minds of conservatives and liberals alike.
So Ibram X. Kendi, and I'm paraphrasing, and you guys could pick up the quote, is that we need discrimination today because there was discrimination yesterday. That's the essence of the quote, right, Tim?
Yeah, he said the only solution for past discrimination is present discrimination, and the only solution for present discrimination is future discrimination.
So I find that to be reprehensible. What say you?
I think it's misguided in large part because I don't believe if there was some God who could just distribute all resources in a perfectly ordained way and did so at the snap of a finger, then maybe that would be a decent argument. In the real world, we have to go through politics, and any kind of discriminatory treatment under any circumstances, no matter how well intentioned, is going to have adverse effects. So with regard to what he said, there is a very charitable interpretation, and that charitable interpretation is discriminatory practices in the past necessitate favorable practices today, a way of bringing people up. My reparations argument, I mean, the poor in this country have always had it bad, at least worse than they could otherwise. That is essentially a version of that argument. Preferable treatment towards the poor. We do this with welfare because there are systemic barriers keeping them from full participation. Along racial lines, I don't even know what that would look like. I don't even know how that would look good. I'm not a big fan of affirmative
He wrote an
action.
amendment, right, called the Anti-Racist Amendment.
I'm not going to criticize, maybe this is Vaush's goal or whatever, but it seems like, and honest to God, I don't even know where I would fall on this. I would have to think about this a lot. If I was going to do a formal debate, I would have to think about this a lot. But it seems like Vaush basically completely and totally retreated from everything having to do with like racial anything, and is basically saying like, oh yeah, we should just all do it based on class. It seems like he made a full retreat from that position, which I imagine Charlie Kirk is probably happy with. That'd be my guess here.
It's not being considered anytime soon. Where it would be preference.
You'll see, Biden will get it.
Yeah. based on skin color, that there would be some sort of accommodation based just by the melanin content in your skin.
Yeah, there is one thing I want to say, though, and this is common in upper academia, and I know IDRIM sometimes gets brought into non-academic discussions, which I don't consider myself an academic, so I'm including myself in that. But sometimes I think these are fun to discuss, these ideas. What I noticed, at least in some of the classes that I took, the higher end classes, was that sometimes when you were presented ideas, they were presented not to have you agree with them, but rather to incentivize the greatest discussion. For example, I wasn't an economist, but I did learn about Karl Marx. Now, not many professors are actual Marxists, unfortunately. So when Marx was brought up in that context, it wasn't like, here's what you need to know, here's what you should believe. It was more, here are some ideas, radical and agreeable. What do you think about them? And when I look at what Kendi has written, I don't often agree with some of the more radical propositions, but I do enjoy the process. And I don't think that's something which should warrant the state intervening to cut out those discussions. I think that's a great brutish response.
That's a great segue if I could go. So the next question then is, should we be teaching first and second and third graders to be hyper-conscious aware of race all the time? I think that's destructive. I think it goes against the American promise of e pluribus unum, of caring more about character than skin color. And yes, Martin Luther King Jr. was a mixed bag when it came to this stuff.
He's a cool guy.
But he was a very radical socialist in some regard, but he really hit it perfectly when he said that this was the ideal of the American system. Do you see any downsides to getting 3-year-olds just caring, not 3-year-olds, third graders caring about the color of people's skin all the time?
Well, I think depending on their environment, they might already, whether they know it or not, in very implicit and subtle ways. We know from tests done, for example, on like little kids, like 4-year-olds or whatever, that some elements of implicit racial bias already infect their thinking. Now, that isn't a moral judgment. We're all flawed beings. We live and we die. We all have biases. That is just a part of life. But I think conversations about those things can be valuable. I don't believe we live in a colorblind world, so teaching people that we do can often lead them to remain ignorant to evident problems. Now, to what extent would you be comfortable, what would you say, like bringing a racial consciousness to third graders?
For me, very little to none. As don't care about it, de-emphasize it, look at the spirit, the soul, the conduct, and the character of the human being. Their skin color means nothing. Not saying that you should start to emphasize, organize what people look like, because therefore it means something that we're going to tell you. A great example is that this is the textbook definition of stereotyping, right? Is that if you see a black person, you don't know their history. You don't know if they're the son of a Nigerian billionaire. You don't know if they're an immigrant from Turks and Caicos. And you don't know if they're the 9th generation descendant of slaves, right? There's been 2 million blacks that have come to America legally through the immigration process since 1980. So this sort of hyper-fixation on race, and I want to keep on getting back to this because I'm just curious, is do you think this is actually helpful when there actually might be stuff that 90% of the country agrees on? Do you think this actually might be a smokescreen tactic?
Well, it really depends on what's being taught. So here are some things I obviously don't want taught. One group is better than another, of course, black people are like this, white people are like this.
That is being taught in some schools.
There are some schools that do that, and while I would look to see their curriculum mended, I just don't want to implicitly agree with like a state ban. I would see adjustments done. But there are some things that I think could be done well. For example, say you're teaching about very basic early history,
This is where I wanted to get to.
Yeah, okay.
This is important.
So here are some things about America's founding that I like. One of the first practical liberal democracies, glory of the republic. Folks had nice hair back then.
Not a democracy, but a republic.
Right,
That's
well,
okay.
I mean, they're not mutually exclusive. And we, of course, did more to fulfill the promise of a democracy with time.
Wait, what did you say? Wait,
But
why do
obviously,
people do
when
that?
America was founded, it was a slave state. 1 in every 6 people in America at that time was human property.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
How many states had abolished slavery by the time the Constitution was ratified?
Well, I don't know the exact number.
9 out of
But I
13.
mentioned-
That's not a slave country.
Well, then you could say it was a confederacy with portions that were slave
I think
states.
that's better.
Okay, wait, real quick. I don't know why the people say we're not a democracy, but we're a republic. We're a democratic republic. A democracy means that we vote on shit, roughly, and a republic means that we elect figures to vote on things for us, basically. We're a democratic republic. I don't know why people are like, we're not a democracy, we're a republic. I don't understand.
Said 9 out of 13 had already abolished. There was a sunset moratorium for slavery in the Constitution.
So this could...
Vermont abolished slavery in 1777. We were on the way to eradication. We were not a slave country.
Well, hold on. I mean,
And I don't think-
we were on the way, but then like 80 years later, it was still
so
happening.
the question is why, right? That's a really important question.
Economics, I
Well,
imagine.
yeah, so Cotton Gin and John C. Calhoun. Happy to go through that. But yeah,
there was actually a grievance in the Declaration of Independence, specifically that the Crown had enslaved people.
The first draft.
Yeah, in the first draft from Thomas Jefferson, that the Crown had enslaved people who had done nothing to offend the Crown, brought them to the states, and then were then offering them the freedom that was stolen from them to wage war against the colonists who had grievances.
It's an effective strategy. The
it
Union
is,
did it
but
too.
he-
They promised the slaves when
Right.
they moved southward. Yeah.
Jefferson took that out. And he did it because they felt, and this is according to historians, that without, I think it was South Carolina and Georgia, they would not have been able to win the Revolutionary War. And so they had to remove that,
That's exactly
hoping
right.
they would stay in. Now, the reality is, I'll just say one more point. They thought they were going to lose anyway. They really did. They didn't think they could go up against the greatest empire in the world at the time. So it's kind of unfortunate, I think. An important factor here is that I believe it was the British Empire, actually 1833 had abolished slavery in all of its territories, and it took the U.S. a little bit longer to do so. But I want to make sure I stress, this issue for the start of the country was contentious and ultimately led to violence because from the beginning, as Charlie pointed out, most of the states had already abolished this, so it was like people were ready to fight from the beginning.
I just want to say to that, my understanding of the founding of America isn't as simplistic as the founding fathers were evil because X or Y. I recognize, of course, that
And I appreciate that.
there are incredible complexities to those issues. And also, I'm not a historian. There are probably tons of things out there I don't even know that might change my opinion in the future. But with that being said, while I recognize there were fine-bodied, hearted, and souled Americans who recognized slavery was a moral aberration from the get-go, 1 in every 6 Americans was owned. And while that may have been constrained to some of the states, it was still ultimately under the purview of the federal government to make decisions with regards to the legality and constitutionality of that. Now, some people, they get really defensive when this conversation comes. I'm not saying you guys, but some people, they do. And I think it's because they think I'm assigning some kind of moral worth to them now or to the country now or making some kind of broad prescriptive statement. I'm not. The only thing I'm saying is when you're teaching history to a bunch of kids, you have to teach it all. At least you have to teach the basic pointers. And for Black Americans, the history of this country has been less than favorable. So I think that in the context of that discussion, saying, and to this day, we still have some problems with race. There are some legacies of slavery that still affect Black people, and we're working on it today. Something like that. That's a kind of racialization that I'm in favor of because it doesn't encourage stereotyping. It doesn't encourage discrimination. It just encourages a base awareness of some serious problems.
So, but that's not happening, right? Is that largely what we're seeing through school districts like Chicago and in Washington, D.C., and the entire California school system, representing 10,000 schools and 6 million students.
I've seen the documents on those.
Yeah, is that it doesn't have that kind of nuance and complexity that you just presented, right? Where let me just say this,
Yeah,
is
of course.
that part of the kind of archangel triumphant of the wokeism coalition.
Getting my food, 1 second.
is no
Did they
compromise.
finally get into something
I
spicy?
don't want them to feel this sense of contentedness. Contentedness is the death of activism for all that's good. And activists have always been, you're an activist in your own way, as am I, have always been the forerunners for good.
They've done a lot of damage too.
Sure, they have, but we make the world move. There are even ideas of Martin Luther King's that I maybe could question if I spoke with him. He wrote a book after the Civil Rights Act. Where do we go from here? Chaos or something good. And he said a lot of stuff about the responsibility for white people to not make amends, but to educate themselves on the experience of Black suffering so that we no longer just integrate. We truly assimilate. We know we're a collective bond. There's always going to be some disagreement. Is the movement valid? To me, a movement which recognizes the racial discrimination, the systemic racism that exists, that there are problems we have yet to overcome, this is a movement worth defending.
I just want to make some data points real quick, and then Charlie, you can come in.
How long is this supposed to go on for?
Man, before George Floyd died, for Black Lives Matter in this country was 16% net support. As of today, according to Civics, it's 3%. That brings it all the way back to 2018, to August 16th. Now, one of the things I think is really important to note is the severe tribalism and hyperpolarization in this country. So if we look at support for Black Lives Matter among Democrats, 86%. Support or opposition for Black Lives Matter among Republicans, 86%. Opposition, mirror image. You take a look at
We
independents.
have more alike than we may think, huh?
Right. You take a look at the independents, though, people who don't align, and I would say, what is the date around May 1st, there was an inversion, and now the majority of independents oppose Black Lives Matter, 44% to 39%.
Are you concerned when certain judges or people running for DA say that accommodations on sentencing should be made on race? Does that bother you?
Who said that? I've never heard that before.
Well, people in law schools have been saying it.
I mean, students have always
Kim
been-
Fox in Chicago has heavily implied that communities of color need to be accommodated for in sentencing. And they've all but done this by just getting rid of the bail laws that we've seen altogether,
Well,
right?
I mean-
Decriminalizing shoplifting, all that, please.
Oh, I'm totally okay with that. We
Okay.
lock way too many people up, just flat out. That's not even.
So like murder out the next day.
no, not murder. You
Well,
said
that's-
shoplifting.
Well, I'm just saying, just the bail reform laws in New Mexico and California have been a disaster. Go
Well, I
ahead.
can't
Here's-
speak
here's-
to that. Oh, sorry.
Here's actually a really great point. It's a tough one for me. I agree. I think we lock way too many people up. I err on the side of liberty, innocent until proven guilty. To take a working class individual who is accused of shoplifting before he's even been proven of guilt, lock him up for several months, he loses his job. However, what do we see in San Francisco? Wave of shoplifting, businesses shutting down because when you don't stop the crime, you get, I guess, a lot of crime.
Yeah,
it's a tough issue. I wanted to let you guys.
I think we'll totally disagree on this. You first.
Maybe. Well, I've read a lot on recidivism. We have a fairly high recidivism rate in this country because really the thing that causes crime more than anything else, it's not actually poverty, it's income inequality. When poor people and rich people share the same space, it leads to a lot of problems. All poor people together in a neighborhood, what is there to steal? Poor people and rich people together in a neighborhood, there you go. You have very clean targets. And what's more, there are other forms of criminality that only really fully express themselves in the types of neighborhoods that have a really strong mix of wealthy and poor. I could see that because, again, from where I grew up, I lived on the border of a lot of low-income communities. Now, Beverly Hills, safest place you could be. 3 a.m., you want to take a jog, go for it. Seriously.
Not anymore.
Maybe. Oh, I haven't been there in like
You'd
5
be
years.
surprised, man.
I'll say this.
Good luck walking Rodeo Drive now.
Well, okay, Hurston, I don't want to walk Rodeo Drive during the daylight, okay?
Well, I agree.
agree.
But after Garcon has had his work in LA, it's a disaster.
Violent crime is down since the 90s. We've had a bit of an up since
It's
COVID,
up
but
massive in the last year.
oh well, COVID's led to a lot of really weird exigent factors. But
Defunding the police.
with all, we haven't defunded the police anywhere.
Minneapolis?
Maybe okay, in a
Wait,
couple
a
places.
lot of places.
Hold on a second.
there-
That's not true. Minneapolis, Portland, Seattle, they've all cut police budgets.
Sorry, I should be-
260 departments, I think it was reported last year, had stripped their funding
Yeah.
from
Sorry,
departments.
when you said defund, I thought I meant like the anarchist vision of like community policing. When it comes to police funds being stripped, there is a conversation to be had about the relationship between that and crime. But the crime increase seems to be all countrywide, so I don't know if I'd be leaning more towards that being a COVID thing and people being restless and angry and I don't know, aggressive. The thing that I'm trying to say though is when I grew up in Beverly Hills, really, really safe, free from violent crime. I could walk half a mile, though, and the area between rich and poor were the areas where people had barred windows. Every time. So when it comes to criminality, there are things that we can
One thing
address
that's
very
really
fundamentally
fucking
that will
weird
help.
about being in LA, and I never got this living in Omaha, obviously, it is really weird that it feels like in LA, I can go to like, I don't even know the names of all the 50 million cities. I can be in a nice place like Venice or Beverly Hills or whatever, or like Santa Monica. Like I can be in all these like really nice areas or Brentwood. And then I can drive like 5 or 10 minutes, not even. And I can go to some places and like every gas station has like fucking super bars behind every window. Like it feels like it changes very, very, very quickly. Or I don't know if I just am only selectively seeing things. That's a really weird feeling driving around LA. It almost feels like it almost feels like GTA, like San Andreas. I don't know if they did this in the later ones, but I remember like in that GTA, like you would drive into a different part of the city, and then like everybody would have totally different cars. It'd be like in an instant the AI would load different shit, and it unironically feels like that in the LA area. Like like really dramatic.
Everyone. I'm sure there are restructures to bail laws that we could do. I don't know the particulars. It's not my field. I've also read stuff on recidivism. Apparently, murder actually has a very low default recidivist rate because usually it's done under a very specific set of heated conditions that don't actually speak to a person's character, which makes you wonder a lot about like moral worth and what really drives a person to do that sort of thing. I think it's something we should look at critically, though I don't have any really strong database arguments. The last thing I want to say, because it's the first point that you brought up, is racial responses to the criminal justice system. Yeah, I didn't forget. I'm actually going to triple down on this one, okay? Not only do I think that we should aggressively look at the ways our sentencing laws affect and discriminate between black and white people and Hispanic nation, I think we should do the same between men and women. Because as much as black people are shafted by the criminal justice system, men are even more. If you take a look at the disproportionate rates of sentencing, relative levels of implicit bias in the jury, women get off with way more than men
Vaush
do.
MRA confirmed.
Way more. So, I mean, maybe it's something we can all agree on. We're guys, I think.
Well, so the issue though is that when you remove race, it's just a matter of income or wealth. For example, if LeBron James goes in front of a jury, he's gonna have the best lawyers, and obviously that's an extreme example, right? But O.J. Simpson had an all-star team, and so the problem is that
Obama. He would also have good lawyers.
O.J. Simpson.
Oh,
yeah,
Obama,
no,
sorry.
sorry. You didn't have Obama's a lawyer.
No, no.
Well, let me
Like
say-
Kardashian and Dershowitz.
I would just like to interject that Obama extrajudicially assassinated people, and nobody did anything about it. So
Now that's black privilege.
But
That's a joke. Don't.
So,
don't.
but I think that there's an implication in your argument that I want to challenge, which is that just because you're poor doesn't mean you commit crimes. I think that's an insult to poor people, right? And so I think that if you automatically assume that, now there are data trends to suggest that, but instead it should be the question of what are we trying to structurally do or through incentives to either punish the people that are committing crimes and lift people out of that current level. So I think it's a good talking point, but I don't think it's totally true to say we have too many people in prison. I think we have the wrong people in prison. Let me tell you why. Really quick.
We have more than like any other
talk
country.
about
No, let me tell you why.
We have
The average
so
rapist
many
serves 4
people.
years in prison, and they're very likely to rape again. Totally different than
Hey,
murder.
look, if you want funding that goes to police departments to go towards actually looking at the rape kits that they take, rather
well
than stuffing
over
them into a bin, then-
250,000 untested rape kits in the tri-state area in New York City. 250,000, right? So our criminal justice system, you could say it had nefarious intentions. I'll be neutral on that. It was very heavy on drugs, obviously in the 80s and 90s. But generally, though, you cited the number. You said violent crime's been down since the 90s. Why do you think that is? It's because we were tough on crime in the 80s, and we had a massive campaign against it, and we had the most peaceful decade in American history.
Well, there were a few factors. The viability of broken windows policing has been challenged substantially, but there are admittedly some benefits. The argument that I would make is that what you're really doing is you're forestalling the problem. There are socioeconomic conditions that increase criminality, not because it makes people worse people, but just because oftentimes crime isn't some
I'm gonna, oh God, oof. I'm gonna yoink a Jordan Peterson talking point here that I don't know if there exists like a formal study to look at this, but so something that Peterson talks about is, and to my understanding, this is pretty true, having like very big antisocial personality traits can be a relatively stable thing through your whole life. So for instance, if you've got a kid that hits other kids, they're probably going to grow up to be involved in kind of like nefarious actions. That tracks pretty well. And one idea that I've heard, I think that he floated was this idea that like what happens is basically you have a kid, he's a violent kid, grows up, becomes a violent adolescent, grows up and becomes a criminal, but a lot of these things are kind of like tacked onto your age. So you commit crimes, you go to jail, you commit crimes, you go to jail, and basically you're kept in jail long enough until you age out of committing crime. It's essentially what happens there. I don't know if there's like a formal study to back that up, or that might be just his way of amalgamating like several different studies, but it's kind of an interesting concept that like, because age highly correlates with crime, right? Like if somebody breaks into your house and steals your shit, it's probably not like a 55-year-old boomer. It's probably somebody like in their late teens or early 20s more likely, right? That it highly tracks on to your age.
direct indicator of poor moral conduct. Oftentimes it is a crime of necessity, or it is a crime born of the discontent and the apathy.
I got to challenge you on that. What would be a crime of necessity today with the welfare state that we have? What would possibly be a crime of necessity?
Don't ever defend this. There in the U.S. it's highly unlikely that there is a crime of necessity. Oh God, please don't do that.
I know I can at least speak from personal experience that I knew some people involved in like they said they would sometimes peddle drugs, and they did it because, well, they may have been.
Okay. Selling drugs is way different. I thought he was about to talk about like stealing from stores or whatever. I think selling drugs, I think unironically, I think you can defend these alternative forms of employment for sure.
The welfare state, their parents' medical bills weren't, not sufficiently, not even close. Stuff like that. Now maybe legally.
I knew this one guy who started fucking cooking meth because his medical bills were too high because he had cancer. This guy was a student, or he was a teacher. And he actually had to turn to a life of crime to do that.
If that person got arrested, the law says they have to be. I could never morally condemn them. They were trying to save their mom, man.
But I got to push back on that.
Sure.
I mean, for sure it's anecdotal, but
it is. So it's not like a data point. You know?
I never understood this having grown up on the South Side. Seeing people sell drugs is not the fastest and easiest way to make money for someone who's desperate. I mean, no joke.
Plasma sales? What would you say?
I made $140 per hour playing guitar in front of a baseball.
Oh my God, Tim, you're so fucking stupid. I would clobber him for saying something to him. Selling drugs is an incredibly reliable way to make money. That's why a lot of fucking people do it. That's why there's an entire black market industry set up around it. If you made money playing guitar, period, you're in the top 0.001% of fucking guitar players, okay? People will talk like, what is the hardest thing to do on guitar? Is it smooth tremolo? Is it learning how to tune your fucking amp? Is it tuning the strings to each other without using tune? The hardest thing about fucking playing guitar is actually getting paid to do it, okay? It is an incredibly difficult thing to get paid to do anything in music. If you're one of the select few that's lucky enough to be able to gig somewhere, one, if you're an average to very good player, you're not making shit gigging. I'm sorry, but that kid, that 9-year-old down the street that's running fucking crack to and from the fucking dealer to the customer, that kid's making more money than you are playing fucking guitar at a bar every Friday, getting paid a $20 fucking whatever. Like, there's no way, okay? Fuck, I can't believe he said that. This is the dumbest fucking example in the world. Oh my God.
Field. Now, I understand not everyone can play guitar.
Or skateboard.
Or skateboard. I knew a guy who said he just bought t-shirts. He went and bought bulk t-shirts. So the people who are selling drugs, they got to buy the drugs first, or they get a loan, and you can do the same thing with socks. And then people go on the side of the road and sell socks. I think the choice of committing a crime was the choice.
Well, hold on. It is always a choice, but what we're really talking about is the limits of determinism here. How much do we choose the things we do? You can make an
Oh
argument.
God, he's not gonna do the coconut thing, is he?
But it's all, I mean, you're religious, of course, so you wouldn't have this argument. But
I wouldn't have anything close to this argument.
right, from a secular perspective, you can make the argument that at the end of the day, the things we do are driven entirely by the chemical reactions in our brain, and therefore everything that we do from start to finish is just a combination of random molecular patterns and blah, blah. We don't live our lives like that. Obviously,
Why did Tim Poulsen get a loan to sell drugs? like you walk into the fucking Wells Fargo, hey, yo, I'm looking for the SBA section, dog. I need to get a fucking loan for some crack cocaine.
choice to get dressed every day. We know how this works in practice, but in practice, we are also the product of our environment. And the fact that, for example, having a single parent while growing up is a pretty strong criminal.
A loan to sell socks. My bad. Still equally funny trying to walk into a fucking Wells Fargo and getting an unsecured loan to start your own soccer t-shirt business. Okay, but okay, a little slightly more reasonable.
Is a suggestion that, I mean, is it an indicator of a person's inherent moral worth that they were born with a single parent? Probably not. So that statistical difference has to be accounted for by the inevitable fact that environmental differences can lead to harsh outcomes.
The question is, though, do you then create a set of lack of enforcement to say that we're actually not going to enforce looting, where you had an entire article in National Public Radio, not saying you believe this, that says the case for looting, right? San Francisco's basically employed this, $900 or less, they're not going to prosecute you, right? Videos of them stealing entire Walgreens, right? Not an exaggeration. And then you have, and just one other data point, just because of COVID, Europe's crime rates did not increase. Ours did. And we had a massive defund police, almost kind of, we're going to be relaxed on criminality type movement. And this is the question, right? Which is, how many excuses or accommodations are we going to give for crime?
Well, we're not.
And I'm just, just to finish, is that my perspective obviously is very little to none. Crime's a necessity. I could think of one, maybe two examples where I would make a moral claim of a crime of necessity, and that would be a revenge crime if someone murdered your wife or your kid.
Necessity?
I'm not saying necessity. I'm saying like a moral accommodation.
Wait, what? No, what? The easy go-to was like stealing food if your family is starving, or like breaking in and stealing like penicillin or fucking insulin or whatever if you've got a dying family. Not revenge murders, Charlie. What the fuck?
I could see where they came from. Not necessity. Let me rephrase that. But the idea that in the welfare state that we have, with the private philanthropy kind of generosity we have, that shoplifting and arson and looting, mugging Barbara Boxer, that we should just say, it's actually because of the environment.
I don't know why you pointed at me when
you
said I've never mugged Barbara Boxer.
I'm saying that as an example.
Yeah, I don't mean.
Was that you in San Francisco?
Where were you?
No, I've gotten stolen from in San Francisco before. It was a very fun experience. That was back before YouTube too, so I couldn't afford to replace anything. Okay, a lot to respond to here. Emil Durkheim, cool guy, dead now, thought that crime was sociologically useful because it shows you where the antagonisms are between people's wants and the state's desires. So crime takes place where there's an agitation between what people are being compelled to do by whatever their own behavior, their desires, and what the state will allow you to do. So, for example, during a food shortage, we can take like Ireland during the potato famine. There were, to put it lightly, quite a few cases of theft during that time because people needed food. They would do anything for it. So the crime of theft in that instance becomes a sociological indicator of a social need that isn't being met. Now today, of course, we do have admittedly a fairly weak but existent welfare state.
It's rather
we do
strong.
have
Very generous.
It's a little
multi-trillions of dollars every year.
Yeah, multi-trillion for America.
I will say
You get $70,000 in value a year. That's plenty.
I want a UBI. We can go way harder.
We do have UBI. We just implemented it with the stimulus.
No, we did. No, well, wait, hold on. Yes, the child tax credits would buy. Well, no,
people
that's
got cash
really
checks. We have UBI now.
Well, it's not a long-standing program.
I'll admit.
And that's only for people with children.
We tried UBI and crime went up.
Well, hold on. Wait. I need to reject the
We
spurious.
send checks. People commit crimes.
Hold on. This is a spurious correlation. Okay. First of all, you will not be able to find any analysis that attributes the increase in crime to people getting their stimulus checks.
No, actually, I think it's the opposite. The argument you're making is that if people have a sociological need, they won't commit the crime. So people got money and they still committed crimes.
Yeah, but it doesn't always correspond one-to-one like that. The reason why people needed money is because they weren't getting any money from their jobs because they couldn't work their jobs. So people were still in a worse position.
Well, they also got unemployment. Remember, very generous unemployment.
The unemployment started
plus
pretty generous.
$600 to $800, right? I think it was a week or a month, right? It was
week.
very
that run through, and not everyone is applicable for unemployment. There are a lot of conditions there that can make that difficult.
No, they were very generous. They didn't
Well,
turn anyone down during the lockdown.
We're being very spurious.
We're very wonky. I'm sorry, I interrupted you. I'm just
oh God, where was I?
Something about some dead guy about how crime is helpful.
I love dead white guys. I actually don't know if Durkheim is white. So I'm not pro-crime, not pro-criminal here. I'm pro-leniency only insofar as I believe it helps to lower our recidivism. Sometimes it finds that it does. For example, you're in prison for 20 years. What do you know? You know the inside of a jail cell. The environment in prison is very bad at encouraging people to get their life together when they get out. And that's why so many people, they get out of prison, they have 6 months on the street before they're back in. Sometimes it's because they want to go back in. Prison's all they know. They did a movie about that. Sorry.
Shawshank Redemption.
And it was a good movie.
It's a great movie.
Yeah, which only serves my point. But with regards to like being lax on crime or whatever, there are a couple of things I think we should all agree to. Okay. First of all, well, maybe we wouldn't. Drugs is bad. We need to stop locking people up for weed, just flat out. I think that drugs in general should be treated like a medical issue. Portugal did that. They decriminalized all drugs. So
there's conflicting data on Portugal, but fine.
It's pretty promising. So you take like heroin. Nobody wants to be on heroin. Okay. If you're on heroin, in the fleeting moments you have in between your little sessions, you know something's up. So you treat that like a medical issue. Say, hey, we have government offices. You want to come by? That helps. Far fewer overdose deaths. And those people, they go ahead. They become socially productive. Bam. No crime. They contribute to the economy. It just works better than locking them up.
I wanted to say something you mentioned with UBI, you mentioned with the unemployment, the stimulus. First of all, we've actually had a really hard time hiring for specific work, like labor stuff, because nobody wants to work. And no joke, like I've been having conversations like every other day, like, can we find some people? And it's like, we can't find anybody. We got signs up and down all throughout the area where it's like, come in, open interviews.
So many.
We had over 800 flights canceled due to staffing shortages, and now we're facing fuel shortages because of the trucker shortage. We're looking at this this unemployment stimulus thing where they're doing the $300 bonus, now they're doing the child tax credit. Which one?
They've looked at these numbers so many times, and now they've looked at the states. My understanding is they've looked at the states where they've stopped the unemployment insurance, and the unemployment problem still remains. It's not like I don't think you can attribute the people's lack of desire to work on the unemployment. That just seems to not have been borne out in any data point anywhere. It just hasn't happened yet.
Won't be for everybody, and we're seeing a correlation with massive job openings and people not taking these jobs.
I think it's phenomenal. Finally, the bargaining power is in the hands of the workers more so.
But it's broken. Like the flights are shutting down. Nobody wants the jobs, even when they do increase the salaries.
So it's true, the flights are an issue. But here's what they don't tell you in the news briefs. So stock buybacks, something that many companies now do because of their decriminalization. The airline companies have spent an anomalous amount of their profits each year on stock buybacks to enrich their CEOs and shareholders, rather than on hiring more pilots. It seems the issue here is this is a simple supply-demand issue. People need to raise their wages. You see these news stories from time to time where it's like, I raised my wage to $15 an hour, and people showed up, and it's like, yeah, that is how economics works.
We had John Schnatter, Papa John, on the show, and he told us a story about a pizzeria where they're paying $35 an hour to some of their pizza cooks or bakers, because that was the line. He kept trying to find people, nobody would do it. He kept raising wages. Finally, he settled on $35 an hour. That means pizzas are going to basically more than double because the wage they were paying before was like 15, and now they're over double what they were paying in labor. Their labor costs go up. They have no choice but to charge substantially more for pizza.
Okay, just real quick and simple math thing for anybody that's been. If you've ever supervised a shift at a restaurant, one of the things that you see is your labor is a percentage of your costs that go into creating anything. You don't even need to have this experience. You just know this. Labor, however, is only a percentage of your overall cost of doing something. So say, for instance, you sell a good for $1 and your goal is to make like 10 cents a profit. So you've got 90 cents that goes into the production of that good. If your labor is 20%, you can double your labor from 20 to 40. We'll say it's $20 an hour to $40. I'll keep it simple, right? Doubling that labor there doesn't mean you have to double your overall cost of that good to maintain the same profit margin, right? Like that 20% increase in, or that 100% increase in, fuck, I'm using numbers. This is really confusing. I don't know if fuck, let me write this out real quick. I'm sorry. People get this wrong so much and it drives me fucking crazy, okay? Let's say that you have your total cost of creating a good is 90. We're just going to say 90, okay? And you sell this good for 100 because you want to make a profit of 10 on every good sold, right? If as part of this 90, if labor is 20, let's say that I double labor from 20 to 40. So let's say I've got people getting paid $20 an hour. Now they're getting paid $40 an hour. Oh my God, I'm going to have to double. Now the thing that used to cost 100 is going to have to cost 200. No, that's not how these percentages work, right? So if it goes from 20 to 40, our overall cost has now increased to 90 to 110. If I want to maintain this same profit margin, the same dollars here, right? Well, now I'm charging 120 to do it, right? Because 120 less 110 is giving us the same profit of $10 per unit sold, right? So I did have to increase my cost, the cost of good or service to the customer at the end, sure. But even though I increased wages by 100%, that ending cost only went up by 20%. It's not a one-to-one increase. So if your pizza people were being paid $15 an hour, now they're being paid $30 an hour, whatever, that doesn't mean you're doubling the price of your pizzas. Labor is only one part of the equation of the total cost to sell a good or service to somebody. Fuck.
In the short term, within a month or so, that might have an impact on those pizza makers. But the ripple effect is going to slam into everybody. All of a sudden, the contractor can't afford to take his family out for dinner. He can't afford to buy the food he wants, because the base level costs are going to start going up. Then the landlords aren't going to be able to hire the maintenance crews to fix the buildings. The landlords are on fixed pricing, which they can't change, which then results in a brick wall, a collapse.
I just want to say, what we're having right now is an unprecedented economic shock. For a year, nobody worked, or very few people worked. And people got used to staying at home. And as the government should, it should have done more, but as the government should, it took care of them a little bit. We have to ride this out. What are government funds for but riding us out through common crises? Better this than war. And now people are returning to work, and they're realizing work sucks. Work sucks everywhere. But in this country, compared to maybe some of our equally developed contemporaries, work really sucks. The work culture, our rate of overproductivity, Americans more than any other developed country, by the way, we push our workers hard. And you have favorable employment numbers, but you don't have favorable underemployment numbers. There are a lot of people who have jobs, but they have like 2 to 3 part-time jobs. They don't get their schedule for the next month until like 2 weeks before the end of the current one. They're constantly worrying about whether or not they're going to make their shifts line up to get enough hours to get the money they need to pay down their student debt along with their rent and everything. It sucks, and it's untenable, and we are in an era of unprecedented record profits for CEOs. So yes, I think the solution to this, and it'll be a rough one, that's for sure, is we should normalize higher wages. Maybe the solution to $15 an hour was never a federal mandate. Maybe it was the inevitable economic necessity of incentivizing workers.
Hard to disagree with a lot of that. I will say that the lockdowns were way too harsh and intense. I will say there is a Fifth Amendment argument to be made, though, that if the government forces you to not work, then you should be able to get something in return. The government cannot take something from you constitutionally and not pay you for it. That's the eminent domain argument, right? Which was one of the best arguments for the stimulus package. I just think the lockdowns were far too severe and far too intense and really infringed on people's liberties and abilities to be able to take risks. I want to go a different direction. I just want to ask you a question. It's just more kind of about human nature. Do you think human beings are naturally good or naturally bad as the human nature?
Oh, God.
Tabula rasa. I really think we are.
Blank slate.
Maybe there's some inclination. We're hardwired to be social. I know that. We're also, at least to some extent, hardwired to be self-serving. The best society merges those two. The best interest for you is the best interest for everyone. The social contract from now
So
until we
which,
die.
Locke's, Rousseau's, or Hobbes? Which social contract?
I guess I would just say the ubiquitous philosophical term more so than
Well,
any
because
specific.
they all wrote on those terms, right?
Right,
And
and
they totally disagreed.
They
on
all
those
thought
things.
different things of humans. They all thought
Hobbes had a very dark view. Rousseau very positive. Locke was more neutral. I'm just curious.
Socialists tend to think that human beings are fundamentally positive, but I reject
That's
that.
why I'm
because-
curious, because you see way too cynical for that.
Well, the implicit suggestion to that, to me, is that socialists think their system would only work if everyone was nice, and I don't believe that. I think that the best economic systems will work when everyone is an absolute POS, just a dirty, horrible human being, and
very
you can
Hobbesian of
incentivize
you.
them. Well, but it should. Maybe humans are amazing, but the best system should survive human greed.
I want to ask you a very simple and general question.
Uh-oh, those are the worst ones to answer.
It is. Do you think some people are better than other people?
Can I add a bit of nuance to that answer?
Answer however you want.
He
I
asked
think
me
that some
this.
people have been developed to be more moral and of better character.
Oh, no, okay.
Yeah.
I didn't mean moral.
Just better, like they're taller.
That's it.
Oh,
However, but I think your interpretation of the question is part of the answer.
by any metric, there will always be people.
Tim told me this. He was like, when you ask this question, conservatives always answer yes, but liberals always either qualify their answer or answer no. That's what they told. I don't know if we did. I don't think we did this on air, but we were talking before, and he was like, "Oh, I always ask this question."
Who are better than others, always perhaps by some combination of environment and genetics. I just hope that we can all ride along beside each other.
I agree. I think I mentioned this before the show. If you were to ask anybody on the left or the right, what did you want? It'd be like for everyone to prosper, for people to be successful, to pull people out of poverty, things like that. I guess the issue is disagreeing on how we get there.
Well, I think I'm not sure if we want the same thing. I want more of a preservation and conservation of what we already have.
Do you want socialism?
Absolutely not.
Oh no, slight ideological.
Well, but come on.
I mean, but we don't need to play the word games. Go
No,
ahead.
Why
sorry.
do you want to preserve?
I think that we have something beautiful, unique, and exceptional. And I take the more Hobbesian view of human nature, which is we're brutish and nasty and awful and cruel. And the fact we've been able to build something decent and civil is pretty remarkable.
But are you saying that we have a good system
A great system.
and people thrive from the system?
I think people,
For Christians that believe that abiogenesis is impossible, that life can't come from no life, how do you get this idea that human nature is fundamentally brutish and bad, but something not brutish and bad came from humanity? I would be really curious to hear the defense of that. That a cluster of people that are fundamentally evil or fundamentally not good can create something that is good. I'm sure there must be writings on this, but I'm curious how they would defend that.
people flourish and
Oh
thrive.
fuck! Unless you say it was granted from God, then I guess that's your out for everything, huh?
I think that a rights-based system is naturally the best way to govern.
Do you want people to be stripped of their rights, imprisoned, brutalized, impoverished?
Of course not. No. I mean, the sacrificing of rights is something that usually has to be earned negatively, like murdering
So
somebody.
this is what I mean, because I think I could ask you the same question. Do you want people to be brutalized, impoverished, imprisoned?
Of course not.
Taking the rights away.
But I would never want to grow complacent. You're both familiar with the Marxian theory of dialectic materialism.
You mean
correct?
Hegel's
I'm-
theory?
Oh no, he had the dialectic, and we built on it. Or
We?
built.
I'd love to get into,
no.
I really want to get into the Marx thing because I'm
I said
super
he.
fascinated by it.
No, I just want to say, the theory, I mean, put simply, I guess, is that human society, the human project, it evolves as a product of antagonism, grinding antagonism between people in Marxian view
It's
of
very,
different.
it's very Hegelian. Yeah.
Well, yeah, no, I mean, he was a student of Hegel.
I know he was part of he was the young Hegelian.
Yeah,
he won
no,
the argument.
Well, no, I'm not. Well, you're not. I'm just saying, like, he would get mad at you if you said he was Hegelian influenced, but I don't think I would. Hegel was a smart guy. I just can't read his work because.
The phenomenology of spirit is impossible to read.
Thank you. All right, I was worried you were going to make fun of me. I just want to say.
No, it's really hard. He made the
It's
very
a brick.
simple complex.
Yeah, he was
We
really
agree
good
on
at that.
something.
I just want to say, sorry. I just want the project of humans moving forward. I think that antagonism fuels it, but in the best way. Not antagonism like war, but antagonism in the sense that we look at our ideas, our values, and we challenge them.
So I just want to say something we disagree on. I don't think humanity is a project.
do you think we're headed towards something better than what we have today?
Probably not. I think that we're actually we're probably engaging in the.
How unbelievably arrogant to say that. That no, we're not going to anywhere better. This is the peak of all of humanity. I just happened to be born in the year where we peaked. Like, what?
Second law of thermodynamics currently that we're untangling. We're going to chaos, not order.
See, this to me, this is the thing, and I'm not trying to patronize. Conservatives have been shown to be more fearful on average, and I think if they thought that way, it would be very warranted.
But some fears are legitimate.
Certainly.
Winston Churchill's fears about the evil Germans were legitimate.
No, I'm not. No, fear is not always illegitimate, and there are elements of this. I think, though, that if society is to collapse, it would probably be from climate change more so than like the.
Oh, come on. You don't believe that.
No, for sure. You can. We'll see it. Assuming COVID doesn't get you, we'll live to see some
Assuming.
pretty severe.
Yeah,
Was it the hottest recorded temperature in Europe? I think it was supposed to happen today or yesterday. Am I making that up? It was like 47 degrees Celsius. What was the, was it yesterday? Did it actually happen? 47 Celsius in Turkey and Greece. I think the record temperature ever recorded, I think, was 48. So yeah, like 48 Celsius is like 120 Fahrenheit. That's without like the heat index. 49 C in Canada, yeah. But okay.
You see it right now.
My problem is,
mm-hmm.
I see all the news, I see all the arguments about climate change, and I'm like, I understand them. And then you get Obama buying beachfront property, you get the celebrities flying airplanes, and I'm like, how am I supposed to trust any of
Bernie,
these people?
got to get Bernie. I rode the train to work. He didn't have to do that. Bernie's the man.
True revolutionary. So
Well, just to finish the
Bernie
point. I'm sorry,
was-
because I kept getting sidetracked.
the idea of the human project is super interesting to me because that's a collision point we're going to have. So
Yeah, well, I'd like to think. I mean, people have always said this is the best it gets. You know, the Postmaster General back in, was it the Postmaster General? Or was it the patent?
No, the patent office 1900. All the patents have been made.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'm not saying it's the best it's been. I'm not saying improvement is not possible.
Maybe we can
There'll
make
be
little improvements, but when I try to put myself in the shoes of men past, you know, I don't know, somebody in feudal China, and to them, what I live in today would have been incomprehensible to them in every imaginable sense, every conceivable way. But their arguments for the permanence of society then would have been better than mine today, because they would have lived in a stable feudal society for millennia. And today, I now am here using technology that would have been alien to humans 20 years ago.
I think about like the Cultural Revolution. I think about the revolution in Russia. And you mentioned the conservatives tend to be more fearful, and I think there's history that shows us things can go bad. You can have something that's good, not great, could probably be better, and then end up with an unchecked movement that results in millions dead.
For sure.
20 to 40 million, I think, in the Cultural Revolution. We had Lily Tong Williams on the other night. She was telling us these stories. Are scary.
Always hindsight, right? Because people thought this about every major event in social progress in America's history as well. The breakup, the Confederacy, the Civil War, the fight to abolish slavery, sure. You know, suffrage for women, yes. The Civil Rights Act, yes. Gay marriage, yes. Every time we make a step forward, you're probably anti-gay marriage, right? Because are you?
I'm pro-traditional marriage.
Okay, sure, right. Anti-gay marriage.
Pro-tradition. Yeah.
Gotcha. Every time,
definitions.
One man, one woman.
every time we take a step forward, well, we agreed on the 3-parent household before.
You disagreed on
That was
polyamory, actually.
50% more efficient than the previous method.
That's not actually a study, is it?
And 10 times more chaotic
are you actually
and
citing
way
something?
more perverse.
Possibly not
I'm not
linear-
actually citing anything.
No, possibly not a linear growth pattern with parents in the house.
It's actually exponential. It just goes up forever.
Yeah, that's
Albert
very,
Einstein had 12 parents. It's
Yes.
just,
By the time you hit 12 parents, the children just a god, by the way. Just
yeah, it's like a
little-
warp
very,
speed.
very, very Ubermensch, but continue, yeah.
Sorry. It always feels like everyone
Pretty
argues.
sure, ironically enough, I think that is how kind of like most children, I think, are still raised in a lot of countries, right? It's a way more communal thing rather than just like a nuclear family that's like cut off from everything else. Maybe not necessarily all living together, but like everybody shares kids and stuff. Like even in nuclear families, right? You've got like a mom or grandma or an aunt or a cousin or a nephew or that comes over and like watches kids and shit. But
Years. Like, this is the best it gets, and any future steps would be treacherous. But then we always make that next step. I don't know if America's going to be around forever. We're a young country, and countries far older than ours have fallen in the lifetime of America. So I can't look at what we have today, or the people that I live with, or the values that I believe in, and assign to them a feeling of permanence. But I can say this. I fear stagnation. And every country that has ever set itself upon stagnation has always died. Every time. Every country always seeks to better itself. And maybe that road to betterment leads to ruin, but the path of stagnation is always ruinous.
I agree. Our culture has stagnated severely. One thing I always bring up is like Christmas music written in the 50s. We still play it nonstop over and over again.
Thank you.
Movies have become repetitive, redundant, reboots. It's devolved from where we had these interesting pieces of art to just regurgitated crap over and over again.
Can I just take some exception with your argument? First of all, there is this kind of revisionist belief that somehow conservatives, in the traditional sense, were against some of those social movements, which is just not true. Now, I'm not saying you'd be a Confederate, and I'm not even getting to the party switching thing, but there is a direct lineage between hyper-focusing on racial politics in the 1860s and the 1920s, and some of the people on the American left that are just completely obsessed with American, racial politics.
It's equality versus hierarchy, right?
But what do you mean by that?
Well, back then, the slave owners wouldn't have been like, I'm really obsessed with race. Well, equality. Now, obsession with race can be pernicious in many ways, but I think there's a pretty big difference between being obsessed with the idea of racial equality and being obsessed with
I think
racial
it's equally
domination.
as pernicious, just they don't have the power to implement it. But we kind of already did that.
Do you
whole
think I'd
discussion.
do that? Like,
You? No, I don't think you would. I mean, I don't know you well enough. You seem rather decent.
I try my best.
But
like,
I wouldn't give power to Nicole Hannah-Jones.
I don't know who that is. Who's
She founded the 1619 Project.
Oh, I just read the thing. I don't know
we
much
have
about
a
methodology.
constitution to prevent us against people like that. What I'm saying, though, is that, for example, I'm not against social change. I'd love to abolish abortion, for example. I'd love to put fathers back in the home.
No doubt.
So conservatives are not necessarily always saying, no, we don't want to improve. We want to stagnate. We want the
I'd
correct
like to abolish abortion and put fathers back in the home. Is that what he just said?
form of social change.
So let me ask this then. Let's get to the core of it then. What values are you looking to maximize? Not
This is
just
a great question.
Not just like morality, because that could mean the same thing or different things to anyone. But if you were to look at a society and were asked to assess its worth, what metrics would you look towards?
It's ability to defend those that can't defend themselves.
Okay.
Charity, generosity, integrity, faith to your creator, the ability to pass down good and moral values to the next generation, one that believes in work and one that believes in the cause of the nation above the self.
All right.
I've got an
I
idea
think that's
with
a
that.
fairly collectivist point, that last one, though, wouldn't it be?
Well,
God, the nation above itself.
I mean,
Stalin
you could call it collectivist, but I wouldn't say the state. I'd say the idea of the nation, right? So there's two different things, and those are conflated sometimes by libertarian socialist types, which is a walking contradiction. I'd love to ask you about that.
Sure.
But just like it's kind of just being
I
like
might
a Christian
answer it-
atheist,
I
right?
might answer it when you're done, by the way, because
Yeah.
I think my follow-up might touch
Yeah,
on that.
but the state is a creation of the people. The people are the country. That's why our Constitution, the preamble, says we the people, not we the federal government, right? So the people are the nation. And so that's why I differentiate between the two. Do you have a loyalty? Do you have a belief that you want to create something bigger than yourselves? I think that's a moral good.
To me, and I mean this without meaning to hyperbolize, but to me that's always strung rather fascist. The myth of the common man, the people, the Volk, the idea that there is a state, and Germany was a state, of course, but Hitler didn't really appeal to the state. It was the concept of the fatherland that he really hit on, and the people were a beating heart of the fatherland. They were an instrumental organ. And to me, the problem with this is that when you get down to it, this thought process, this mentality, it drives men to do terrible, terrible things. Because interpersonally, all of the chemical effects of empathy kick in. I look at you, I see you. But you start bringing in concepts like the nation, the fatherland. And it becomes very easy to convince people to compel themselves towards courses that they would otherwise not.
So, expected you to use a 1930s reference earlier, so congratulations.
No, well, I'm only saying, I'm not calling you a fascist. I'm only saying
no, I know,
that
you did do the correct, I didn't mean to hyperbolize, but there's other nations today that have those values that we would never call fascist, like Japan. Japan has very strict immigration.
Well, I think Korea is actually a better example, to be honest.
I really don't like either of those countries for the reasons that I've described.
You don't like Korea?
I think they're both deeply conservative countries.
I agree with you.
Right,
They're wonderful.
And I think they do so in part because there's a degree of anti-individualism in the subservience they all expect of the common good. Now, it's funny, I feel like our roles are being reversed a little bit here.
Isn't that interesting?
The common good isn't something I appeal to. For me, the value I want to maximize...
No, I just appeal to the good.
The good, sure, the
Which
good.
is two different things.
Is freedom. That's what I care about most. And that's what libertarian socialism is about. There are many types of freedoms, positive and negative. If I might indulge very briefly, like, is a man thrown to a lawless desert without food, water, or clothing free? Really asking.
So, probably no.
I agree. He's free to die.
But that's an extreme example, not applicable in modern wealthy America.
Anytime there is one correct answer, if somebody wants to have a philosophical discussion with you and they give you an analogy or metaphor or some example and you think it's bad, then the correct response is, this is disanalogous. It doesn't work for this. If your response is, that's an extreme example, then instead you should just say, bro, I'm too fucking stupid to entertain a hypothetical. Can we just like talk about something black and white? God, it's so fucking annoying.
No,
or any Western nation.
But it's a philosophical base.
It's also a Rousseauian argument. Man's born free, and he, spends the rest of his life in chains. It's just anti-commercial in nature.
Well, no, but it's a base philosophical argument because it's true they're lawless. There's nothing preventing him from doing anything in that environment, but he has no ability to act on his
But do you know what he
desires.
does have? Consciousness.
Well, sure.
So that's a natural rights doctrine that I will defend.
Well, I mean, I like consciousness too. The only point that I'm getting at is when it comes to people's freedom and the ability for people to protect their freedom, this is what I care about. It's what Marx cared about. If you actually read what he wrote, and
I've read Das Kapital, I've read the Manifesto, and guess what? He was right about some things.
Then you know.
But not everything.
He didn't talk
he was really wrong
about equality. He didn't write on equality. He wrote on freedom because he believed that society was a very complex interlocking network of systems that in some ways liberated men and in other ways enslaved them.
But do you know what he got wrong? He got wrong that sometimes people can be free for other devices that they are not able to regulate. They could be free not from alcoholism, drug addiction, some sort of any other sort of perverse addiction. The idea of freedom is a very libertarian.
But I
view of
agree with
freedom.
that, though.
No, I know you do.
The greatest society.
I say that. Okay, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Just the greatest society is one where a man is born and there are as few things as possible preventing him from doing whatever he wants for the rest of his life.
I totally disagree.
So long as, of course, he doesn't deprive others of the ability to do the same.
So I think that's a miserable society.
Freedom?
No, that's not freedom. That's licentiousness or degeneracy.
Hedonism.
That's chaos.
What is degeneracy? I like men.
How about pedophilia?
Okay. Well, obviously
You said
that would
whatever
infringe-
he wants. Is
As long
pedophilia
as
He just said
freedom?
freedom
though?
As long
from
as they don't
hurting other
infringe on the
people.
rights of others. I'm sure you could believe, I would believe
Well,
that.
so then,
infringes
so
on the
there
rights of
are
others.
limits on freedom, is what you're saying. It's not this Wild West
He
camp.
literally said that in the first thing he said. He said, as long as you don't infringe on the rights of others. This isn't a gotcha.
Pain.
As
So
long
where do you
as you-
get those limits from?
Well, obviously, you would probably have to have a pretty complex interlocking legal system to determine what we agree upon as like a reasonable limits we can place on people's behavior. We have that now to an extent.
No, I know. So like pedophilia, bad.
that
right?
would be a bad thing.
Okay, kidnapping,
That would be a bad thing.
rape.
That would be a bad thing.
Why do you think those things are bad?
I think they're bad because you're stripping other people of the ability to do that which they will. With all those examples, you're inflicting harm on a person.
How about dealing drugs?
I think that dealing drugs is a person's freedom, as is taking a
But you're,
person's.
you're taking.
What
some-
about dealing drugs to kids?
Dealing drugs to kids? I think I would disagree with that, probably because I think there's something exceptional about addictive substances and children. That being said, I think a lot of stuff would apply to children specifically. Contract law. Kids can't sign contracts,
So
but there's
do you,
nothing wrong
do you see
with
what I'm getting at?
contracts.
Eventually, you do agree that a conservative framework is necessary.
But I don't think that's a conservative framework because there are other things I care about that you would always disagree with, like collective ownership of the means of production.
Yeah, I totally disagree.
Which,
I think private property and freedom are linked together.
which
Here's-
would give workers the most freedom possible.
We've definitely gone along because it was just
But
so,
this has
so
been
it was
helpful,
fantastic.
right?
It was
It
fantastic.
feels like it's been 5 minutes.
Oh yeah, I know.
I know, right. And Ian, you've collected a bunch
Jesus,
of great.
really?
Like 50, at least.
So right.
I'm going to use the restroom. Is that okay?
Uh,
Go away.
All right, yeah, go do it
It's
to
gonna
it.
take like 100 seconds.
Yeah.
You can time me.
I'm kind of interested in what you think about. I think humans are inherently destructive by nature, and that if you took a human and put him in a room with a bunch of small animals and plants, over time, his hunger, purely because of hunger, ultimately, he would destroy.
Well, I feel like this guy's like budget Joe Rogan, or not even actually. That might even be. I shouldn't say anything. Never mind.
And consume all of those animals and all of those plants. And then if you put another human in there, one of those would eventually destroy and consume the other human.
I do think that we are maybe inherently expansionist. I think that might be a defining trait of our species.
Life.
I mean, we conquered the world, and God willing, we survive. 1,000 years from now, we'll conquer the stars, and that's unique to us. Other animals don't do that. I don't know if that's a good thing. Maybe everything would have been better.
They do this. Every animal does. The issue is
Build
that
spaceships?
no. Expansion.
Oh, yeah. But
I not build spaceship. That'd be cool though. You know, dolphins taking off.
over time, the limits of their abilities constrain them to a given area, a given population. But we clearly haven't been kept in that way.
Intelligence has
too
separated
smart.
us from that from the equilibrium. A lion chasing a gazelle. The gazelle, runs faster. The lion has to run faster. The zebras and the stripes are confusing. Some get away, some don't. There's a natural adaptation process. We know what evolution is. But humans, we adapt instantly. We are like, hey, that bird's flying. I got an arrow.
And we have, and there are. I just want to say, we're talking about evolution.
Yeah, non-controversial topic.
No, well, in a non-controversial way. Believe it or
Yes.
not, you'll have to catch the behind-the-scenes release. I just want to say that I don't have much optimism for the human condition. I'm not like a huge optimist about this. We are, I think, very potentially destructive. I just think that we also experience, or we're better receptive to reward incentives than any other thing.
Ian's got a bunch of questions.
Yes.
So for
Yeah.
everybody who super chatted, we were having Ian, we mentioned in the beginning, go through and try and find really good questions. A lot of people are saying really awesome things. I want to read one that's not a question real quickly. It's from Adam Schrader, who said, so far this whole conversation reminds me of friendly bar discussions 10 years ago. I miss that world. Thank you, Vaush and Charlie, for being excellent. Thank you, Tim, for steel manning. You all have leader demeanors. I know a lot of people disagree with each other, especially in the chat. Not everyone gets along, but I think it's a fantastic conversation.
Thank you,
so
Tim. Thank you, Charlie.
Ian's got some questions.
Let me bring them to you.
And then afterwards, if we still have time permitting, I would like to do the member segment and then personally be more involved than I've been for the most part.
Sorry, we've been.
Well, no, that was kind of the point.
Back to arm
There's
wrestling.
There's a million things. I'm like, and I did interject. You guys know I did.
Just toggle to the right to go through all of them.
Thanks, Ian.
Okay,
Thank you, Ian.
these are some pretty good ones. So you just said press. Okay, there we go. So Ian's pulled some super chats. M asks, please ask each guest if they agree or disagree with the statement. Abortion breaks the non-aggression principle and why.
Obviously, yeah. I think abortion is immoral, and we should do our best to eradicate it.
I don't really believe in the NAP. I understand people's discomfort with abortion. I think that unfortunately it's a legal necessity as a byproduct of some very compelling personhood arguments I've heard in the past, which I would have to read up on again before reciting.
Can I ask a question? When do you think life begins?
I don't know what life is.
Oh no, you gotta have a better answer than
Your
that.
You have life right now. When did your
Oh
life
no.
I don't remember the first 6 months of my life. I genuinely don't
Looking
know.
at the development of a human life, when would you say that begins?
I know when human bodies develop. The genuine answer that I have is that I think that it's always going to be dictated somewhat by intuition. The intuitive answer from me is life begins at birth. That's my intuitive. If you asked me, like, that's what feels right, but I'm sympathetic to other perspectives.
What about when DNA is formed?
Well, that would be a conception, right? Or at least right after. Well, that's not what. Obviously, not. It's not the metric that I would look at.
How about heartbeat?
That's
Oh,
6
fuck.
weeks? No,
As
earlier.
early as
Vaush!
6 weeks, could be as early as
We started fighting before I got into the abortion debate, so Vaush might not have watched my streams on these ones. Fuck. The abortion argument against somebody like Charlie Kirk, I think would be layup. It would be a layup argument.
as late as 6 weeks, early as 25 days.
Okay, no. These are interesting metrics. I think that my understanding of consciousness is more of an emergent property of experience, more so than it is. I would have to reread. It's been a while since I've read up on this.
You know what I love is you said, when do you think life begins? That was your question. I love how framing changes everything. Watch, ask me now.
Tim, when does life begin?
I think it was when proteins formed and started self-replicating in the primordial. Oh, you mean conception?
Right.
You see, like it's interesting how framing changes everything.
To me, it's more, I guess, for me, because like any cell in our body is alive. There is life and DNA in any bit of skin off my fingertip.
I wasn't meaning
So-
to poke at you or anything. I
No,
was just
no,
like,
I know.
The
I would-
framing
so
is
I would only say
when,
to me-
when is a life worthy of protection begin?
That's a difficult question. To me,
That's a better way to word it.
to me, that has to be a legal question because protection has to be arbitered by an entity, and it can't be. And for me, that would probably be at birth. I've heard people make convincing philosophical arguments that there are times after birth when you're not even a person, and I've heard people make convincing arguments for conception. But if you're talking about a legal entity, the birth thing seems to be the line that's the easiest to distinguish. And there are other legal concerns as well. But this is an issue that I think well, I always support like a pro-choice argument. The philosophy behind it is something I'm a little more
I'm just
open to.
So is it more on the size of the being, or the level of development of the being, or the environment of the being, or the degree of dependency? Which one do you think out of those things is the reason why you say birth? I'm just
I
curious.
think the degree of dependency is legally worthwhile, but for consciousness, I think it's more about it being an emergent property of experience.
So is it okay then if we just basically pull the plug on all the people that are kind of comatose and cucumbers on machines? They really don't have self-consciousness, and they're very dependent.
Well, I mean, legally we do believe that because if you have
Oh, it's
a
very
legal-
tricky in the courts.
It is, but it's not the same as murdering a person. If there's conservatorship over a person who's brain dead, there are instances where you will be allowed to pull the plug. This is
You can't do so without an arbiter, though. You can't just call in and say, just pull the plug. That is murder.
oh well, yeah, you can just yank it, of course.
You have to get approval and
assess.
process
Yeah, yeah,
and-
yeah,
yeah.
But it does indicate that legally and morally there is ambiguity with regards to the
No,
relationship.
but it shows
between
that there
right
is
to
an
life.
arbiter, though. That you have to go through a system of checks. I didn't mean to derail Tim.
God, the layup is that yes, there is an arbiter, but would you allow an arbiter to decide to murder another person for no reason? No. So the comatose person is treated fundamentally different than somebody that does have a current conscious experience and is going to have one into the future. That's the layup on this one. Yeah, you need an arbiter to pull the plug on somebody, but you wouldn't accept that same arbiter for somebody that is currently alive, right?
Sorry,
it's
yeah,
just- I want to make sure we can get to as many questions
Of course.
as possible.
Yeah, yeah.
That was great. That was great. Camilla Mamani says, WTF, a libertarian socialist, is like a meat-eater vegan.
Libertarianism was actually a left-leaning ideology. It was co-opted in the early 20th centuries by capitalists. But actually before that, libertarianism was exclusively in the purview of socialists. And I believe what they believed, that freedom is the greatest human good as long as it doesn't infringe upon others, and that the best way to achieve that freedom is through democracy. We have political democracy, flawed as it is. Economic democracy is something we should also strive for.
I'll tell you this. Left libertarian quadrant is the hardest quadrant to be in. You have the only persuasion tactics. If you're left libertarian, which exists, you're basically saying, I like socialism. Now I have to convince people that it's the right thing and they'll agree with me. And people just won't.
I find left libertarians less threatening to the American way of life.
Oh, thank you.
Because you have a general distaste for authoritarianism.
Well, for what it's
The
worth,
right has money. They're like, well, you want to agree with me, but I can give you money. And they're like,
The left does too. Sorry, go ahead.
no, just want to say for what it's worth, there are some people who call themselves socialists who I actually think would agree probably more with you than with me. Like people who support China, for example. China's not socialist. It's a rampant
Yeah,
capitalist
it's,
state.
it's a
that's largely-
cronyist state is really what it is.
Right. Well, I mean, whatever you want to call it, certainly not what I want, you know. So there are people who defend that, and I can't help but think, like, okay, these are conservative, what would you call them, traditionalist social positions, and
Yes.
you defend, you know, a strong state with a strong common will towards the betterment of the state and a free market. I don't know, you know, maybe that'll be what would they call that, the Red Brown Alliance? No, I'm joking.
In a way,
So I've got a question for Charlie.
Sure.
I'm not sure. I'm not familiar, are you familiar with Alden's theory?
No.
You're not? Oh, okay. Then I guess I won't answer that question then. All right. And then the next question would be for both of you is, what is the single biggest political issue for each of you? And
Epic
Charlie,
meme,
go
guys.
answer first.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question.
I'm
Political
sorry,
issue-
for 2022.
Oh, like I could
Yeah.
take that any way, I guess, right? You know, what should Republicans run on, I guess, or like
Yeah,
just
how
what
do
is the biggest issue? Yeah, I mean, man, it's I'd say the way we do elections in our country is definitely up there. Big tech is massive. Immigration is huge. But I think even something more fundamental that I was trying, I think we almost achieved it tonight, which is that we're about to tear this country apart. And I think dialogue is something that is so beautiful and is so complex and almost.
The answer is economic issues, by the way. That's what most Americans care about. The only people that give a fuck about the CRT shit or whatever, this is like a culture war subset that I think if you're economically satisfied, you don't really give a fuck about. This is just what like people on the news talk about and people in politics want to obsess over.
Spiritual in nature, that if we don't have dialogue with people that you fundamentally disagree with, then there's really not a middle ground until you start ripping each other apart. And I'm really afraid of that.
What's the biggest issue 2022?
I agree that the political rift is almost insurmountable seeming. The last time we had one this bad was pre-Civil War, and we didn't really fix it. We just had a Civil War, and people were still mad after. So I hope that doesn't happen. I don't think we're going to have a Civil War, by the way. There are some people. I think that at the end of the day, there's a big difference between the problems we're told to care about and the problems we're willing to fight about. And I'm not entirely sure if I know where those lines are, but I know there's a difference. With regards to what I'd care about, for me, it has to be climate change. I know a lot of people roll their eyes at this stuff, but like you can take a look at the polar ice caps. You can take a look at the weather disasters we've been having, increasing both in frequency and intensity. This isn't like look, think of it this way, okay? I believe in American industry, all right? It's a little too late for us to be first comers, but if we really wanted to, we could subsidize the hell out of green energy. You think we're doing it now? Triple that, okay? Really lay the groundwork. In 20 years, we'll be selling the rest of the world the energy they'll need to survive.
You know what really breaks my heart is the video I made before the actual Green New Deal, talking about how we needed a Green New Deal, and then AOC's Green New Deal was like equity and college and healthcare, and then the botched FAQ, and I was like, I'm talking about why are we spending money on war when we could be researching green technologies and more efficient energy, thorium salt reactors, things like that, get fusion to ignite. Instead, we get this like racial equity garbage bill.
I do like the Green New Deal, but I had this problem too with that teachers union board, the one that affirmed CRT, said they're going to
The National Education Association.
Yeah, it was also a union, or maybe it was
The NEA.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
Okay,
it's the largest teacher union in the country.
Because first of all, what they said wasn't CRT, but I'll take
They
that up
did
with them
use
if
the
I ever,
words.
They did, and still they got that wrong. So
they
if I
mean
ever
critical
argue
race
with
praxis.
them, yeah,
they mean
yeah.
what we've been talking, wokeism.
Yeah, I just, oh man, it's because the theory is cool, you know.
That's what I'm talking
you wouldn't
about.
agree with it, but it's interesting.
Finish what you're saying. I want to say something about this really
I
quick.
do not think it's cool, and I
Well,
think
no, the theory is awesome. It's like the
rad.
theory of communism. We should have a philosophy class where you learn about critical race theory. Teaching it in practice to children is a different idea.
So I actually, in response to my absolute failure in giving you the adequate response in our last conversation, did pull up Critical Race Theory by Kimberly Crenshaw and actually read what she was talking about. And I think the idea of the oppressed versus oppressor in race is a horrible thing when we're trying to get away from that. And I had a conversation with an actual racist recently, and the ideas to me are absolutely nonsensical to base things on race. Coming from an actual racist who was advocating for the same things in that book, I was like, so you're happy with this stuff? Like, well, no, because the wrong side's in charge. And then I had to explain to them, like, I do not see the world the way you do. And he says, well, that's the trouble with race mixing. And that's, and no, but that's exact. This is what I see when I talk to people who are in favor of critical race theory's core ideology and white nationalists. They tell me the same garbage in different ways.
Look, I have always been a firm supporter of the idea that the ideas should be what's criticized, not like the people who make them. Sometimes, for example, people will make fun of me because I talk on class issues and I'm from Beverly Hills, and I accept the jibing. You know, it's fine. But I think anyone can speak in this stuff. To be fair, this is idpol, and everyone does it to an extent. Candace Owens will deflect criticisms of racism by saying she's black. We've all seen people do this. The only thing I wanted to say, because I have to move back like 6 points here, is that with regards to the teachers board you spoke on, and the Green New Deal, I sometimes feel like the left is a little bit bad when it comes to mixing all their causes. If they, speaking of separatism, if they kept things a little bit more stringent, a little more focused, maybe they could get people to agree on some of it. But if every push for climate change is also every other progressive note, and every push for racial equality is every other progressive note, it feels like it's like an all or nothing package, and I think that can put some people off.
I wanted to just clarify quickly and to inject my id poll, as you mentioned, you know, Candace Owens would do it. I would, and a lot of people are always mentioning, you know, Tim Pool mentions he's mixed race, and I'm like, maybe that's why you'll understand when people are writing like whiteness this and people of color that. I'm like, I don't exist in that world because I've been discriminated against by all of these people. And when that person said to me, you know, the perils of mixed racing or race mixing, he's talking about me personally, saying, I don't understand the tribalist worldview of racialists and identitarians because I've never experienced what it means to be in a racial tribe. And you know what? I think he's right. And that's why I love the classical liberal view of opposition to racism, judging people based on the content of their character, not the color of their skin, because I see this world that's being built critical of whiteness. That includes me, but then it's always the negative. Every experience I've ever had, be it from white nationalists or from critical race theorists, is that you are bad for whatever reason. I do not want to live in a world where race is the predeterminant policymaker or factor on these things. And you know what? For the progressives to come out right now and claim civil rights and say we did all these things and then tell me I now face that detriment, I'm like, you know what, man, my grandparents, civil rights activists, race mixers, my actual parents also mix in races and stuff, and I'm like, I can now look at the progressives who are putting a detriment on my life and insulting me no matter what I do, and the white nationalists who vandalized my home as a child, and it's the world that you're taking credit for, that you're trying now to put a detriment for people like me.
Well, it could be a matter of perception as well. I've read a lot of like academic critiques of whiteness, which isn't white people. It's a sort of
That's not true at all.
well, it's an academic term to describe affectations associated with white people culturally, more so than the actual act of being
But black
white.
and brown literally means black and brown.
If there was
Yeah.
a critique
Well,
of
it's white and
blackness, what would you think of that?
Well, if it was an academic term used in that way, then I would think of it the same way. But since there isn't such a term, I would have to be critical. If you look, regardless of the etymology of the term, in concept, it's meant to be like, you know the term toxic masculinity?
Yeah, I've heard it once or twice.
A couple times, you know. When I read stuff like that, it's interesting stuff, you know. I don't think of this all men are bad, all masculinity is bad. It's more of a salient critique of certain cultural trends. Now, the problem that I have is essentialism. Some people will take
Nina
this
Turner losing
on
in
both
the
left
special
and right,
election in
and
Ohio.
they'll think of it as an individual critique, which it should never be used as. If I were to say something like, imagine I'm reading MLK back in 1953, you know? MLK had some things to say about white people back during his era. He would say that, you know, the whites of this era are unconcerned with the plight of black people, except he didn't say black people. And this is a non-essentialist critique. He didn't believe in racial essentialism. He wouldn't go up to an individual white person and judge them negatively for that. But he understood that as a cultural trend, this is indeed a pattern he recognized.
So massive group stereotyping.
Well, massive group stereotyping that's been done by every civil rights movement to have ever existed. Maybe the issue isn't the stereotyping so much as the way it's being applied and used. If the stereotyping is, I notice there's a big difference in abolitionist thoughts between white and black people in Southern America in 1852, maybe that's the kind of stereotyping that can be used for good. Also, stereotyping by definition is assuming characteristics of an individual because of their part of a
That's
group.
close to what MLK was saying when he said white liberals. I mean, that's
You wouldn't apply it to an individual, though. I mean, I've made comments about groups, people who play League of Legends, degenerates, the lot of them. But I know people who play League of Legends, and when I talk about people who play League of Legends, I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about people who play League of Legends.
So I want to ask you about the climate change thing. What do you think is a bigger threat, climate change or China?
To the world or to America?
To you, the world, America.
I think it's still climate change. I think China is probably going to replace us as the dominant power. I'm not really happy about that because we're more democratic than what they are in terms of our political structure. If they had a better democracy, I might favor them over us because I don't really care about national allegiances. But we are more democratic than them, so the climate change thing is an issue that will affect us all, though. The big one's going to be climate refugees. There are a lot of low-lying coastal communities that are going to be inhospitable to life in about 40 years, and they're going to move out into populated areas, and there's going to be border conflicts and war. It's going to be tough.
We're not gonna be able to get to every single.
I'm
Super
so
Chatter
sorry.
question.
That's on
No.
me.
It's no big deal because I think it's more important that you guys are having these arguments. So I'm not going to interrupt you when you're actually debating the ideas. That's the point. But a lot of people did super chat. Just know that you guys super chats greatly appreciated. There's a whole lot of them.
Yeah.
We love you.
So,
guys rock.
but I've got one critical for you, Vaush.
Hit me up.
Nasho Nabo says, Vaush is a black person who grew up in majority white areas. Those conversations are very demoralizing to be a part of. I don't doubt your intentions, but it's best to speak to people affected by your ideas before trying to implement them as our white savior.
I don't appreciate the white savior critique because that's just the opposite end of idpol, isn't it? Saying that I'm less inclined to talk about these issues because I'm white. Like that's kind of like the opposite thing.
I agree. I think address the idea.
I agree with that too.
Yeah.
But with regards to like the implementation here, obviously like social problems like this, addressing them is going to be contentious no matter what. I don't know if there's a way to do this, to fix any problem, even the most obvious problems. Today we think slavery, obviously that's bad, but clearly there was some disagreement. With issues like this, there's going to be disagreement. I don't know if there's a perfect way to handle it. Anything is going to mix people up. I have to balance that concern with the hope that in the future people become more accepting of these issues. A good example of that would be like gender stuff, for example. In terms of like, if you look at it generationally.
Wait, hold on. Why do you guys use image hosts that are so fucking garbage? Can somebody explain? I really want to know an answer. Why do people use this? So like, I click this link and I see it's some picture of Vaush with a thumbnail that a guy's making fun of, but there's literally like a fucking not safe for work bondage picture right beneath it. Why are you using a site called imagebin.ca? It's not safe for work? Here's what I see on my monitor. Sorry, yep, I'm hijacking this to do this. I obviously I can't show this on stream, but why are you guys, but what I don't understand the most, and people do this shit, at least I can kind of understand Gyazo. If you're lazy and you don't know how to work computers, you use it. But like, I don't understand why you don't just use better image hosts. Whatever, okay.
Boomers to
Right here, real quick, if you guys don't know how to do this, because apparently people don't know. So Windows key, let's say I want to share a picture of, oh my God, look, Vaush has a really funny face, right? Windows key, Shift S, okay? Clip what you want to take a screenshot of, Control T, new tab, go to Imager, and then Control V. And after you wait for this dumbass fucking ad, because they do this now sometimes, you literally just have the thing here. And then it's just on Imager, and there's not some crazy fucking bullshit. I don't know why Imager started putting fucking ads on their site, though. And then boom, you have it. Sorry, okay.
Gen Z people are like 30 times as likely to know a person who identifies as trans or non-binary or whatever. And for that reason, conversations on those subjects have become significantly easier.
What's wrong with Gyazo? I don't know what it is, but every time you try to make an image larger or smaller, the site does some weird fucking shit. Like some dude tried to learn CSS and halfway through was like, fuck it. Every time you try to like open or like make a picture bigger or smaller, it's you get a fucking seizure trying to do it. That's why I don't like Gyazo.
Because people have been exposed to the concept. Maybe in time this will be easier. Maybe I'll fail, we'll all fail, and it won't be. But I am sorry that these conversations are difficult.
All right, let's see. Well, I got to be honest. The overwhelming majority of the super chats are just saying thank you for having a conversation.
Those are the overwhelming majority ones that I copied.
No. I was looking at
they
it.
are,
I thought you
They're
had
also
all the questions. So I was like, okay, I can see everyone very excited. That's why I read the first one. And some people have pointed out that in a conversational format, you are both less derisive and divisive in your arguments.
All YouTubers
Try
should
to be
take
nice
note
in
of
my
that.
streams.
So here's an interesting and kind of specific question. Joshua Ali asks, should courts decide cases based on rule of law and precedents, or decide each case based entirely on rationality and morality?
No, go ahead.
Yeah, it needs to be a balance. Precedence definitely matters, especially in the American system. And the idea of the whole third branch of government really kind of came into question with Marbury versus
Shift Win key S saves it to clipboard and is faster. Shift. What did I literally just say? GSU Gambit. What did I literally just said?
Madison with the first Supreme Court Justice of the United States, John Jay, I believe, who was one of the co-authors of the Federalist Papers. Precedent is important, but it's not everything. And this is a super important thing that conservatives need to talk more about, which I think you would agree with, Vaush, is that precedents can be really bad. Dred Scott was awful precedent. It was really bad. It was 7 Democrat U.S. Supreme Court justices, 2 Democrats that said black people were not people. And that
I
precedent
like I has to get the Democrats in there.
was in law basically for many decades until it was eventually reversed, largely because of the Brown versus Board of Education. But precedent also is helpful so that you don't turn the courts into another legislative branch, right? So the courts are supposed to be very unique, and they're supposed to be deliberative, process-oriented, say no to more cases than they say yes to. And so the question is, where do you strike that balance? Alexander Hamilton predicted that it would be mostly based on public opinion, that judges are still people too, and they're going to look to public opinion. This goes to more of a Democratic argument than a Republic-style argument. I will defend precedent more than overturning, but I definitely think the court has gone wrong in a variety of different decisions in the last 60 years. And I think that what happens is you have very activist decisions, and then they decide not to look at it again under a conservative belief of precedent.
I think I would lean more towards precedent, as well, though maybe for a different reason. I think it's because we need accountability. The problem is if judicial decisions are entirely at the discretion of the judge, it becomes very difficult to correct legal trends through anything other than appoint better judges, which can be an incredibly long-standing process. And even then, it's a crapshoot. I mean, you don't know everyone's opinion on everything. That being said, I do think that to an extent, judges are legislators. This is actually a critical legal theory perspective, which fed into CRT. The idea that within the bounds of discretion, judges will almost always side with the political biases they have. And that's not like a dig on any side, that's just what we are. That judges who identify as liberal or conservative will overwhelmingly side with each other in the plurality of cases because our biases do inform us. I think that we have to recognize that's a reality, but we do have to constrain the process through judicial precedent, or otherwise it's just throwing darts at a wall.
I just want to point out, one of the super chats noted that we were trending.
Oh, is that right?
And so I'm like,
on
all right,
Twitter or on YouTube?
On Twitter, but it says content creator Vaush debates with radio talk show host Charlie Kirk on Twitch.
Fuck.
Oh, are we on Twitch?
Oh,
Oh,
that's
we're
Amazon
on Twitch.
It's on YouTube. I just thought it was funny that
Well,
was
at least
wrong.
we're trending.
But it's like how did you get that wrong? Unless somebody's
Come on,
like
man.
screen grabbing.
It's the
and
Twitter.
putting-
Hey, listen. After the Twitter trending title descriptor had to spend like 6 weeks in a row describing everything that happened with those Minecraft YouTubers, I feel like this is they're a little bit off their game. You saw
Maybe
that, right?
somebody's
No.
restreaming it on Twitch or whatever. You know,
I
it's
know.
copyright infringement. I'm just kidding. It
No,
is.
I know that Shu did a stream commentating on us.
Oh, really?
So maybe that was on Twitch.
All right, so we got one from Dylan Perrick. He says, do you guys think philosophy could be taught instead of CRT, like Plato's allegory and the cave? In my opinion, stuff like this helps people better understand one another individually.
I'm hugely in favor of more theoretical classes being taught to high schoolers, philosophy, sociology, and I don't know what the modern equivalent of like finances or home ec would be, but something like that. Kids graduate, they don't know anything about anything when it comes to managing their finances, which is weird.
We agree.
Because that will destroy them if they don't. Like, why do we teach them that? Philosophy, everyone should be learned on, just flat out. I think that's a moral necessity. And when it comes to sociology, I'm not even talking like left-leaning inclinations on that. I mean like the basic ability to read like statistical information on what's going on, because for the rest of their lives, they're going to be asked to vote based on political information they don't have the education to understand.
Yeah, I mean, philosophy comes from a Greek word, love of wisdom, philosophos, and we definitely don't have that right now in our country. And yeah, I'm a big fan of teaching. I just want to teach it correctly. I'd say a lot less Nietzsche and Kant and Hume and a lot more Aristotle and Locke and Aquinas and Augustine. And I think the problem is, though, if philosophy, if left if not, so Plato would say this. So Plato would say, I'm not going to teach philosophy until you could do advanced Euclidean geometry. It's his rule. Now, why would he have that rule? It's like, if you can't think rationally and be able to determine good ideas from bad ideas in the I'm not going to even get close to teaching you about the Allegory of the Cave or the Ship or Plato's Republic or the forms. So I think there's actually something to that if you introduce philosophy too early, you can create kind of one-liner philosophers that think they understand the entire world. And it really goes to that expression, the more I know, the more I realize how little I knew when I thought I knew it all. That's kind of that idea of daring to know.
The corollary is true too. You know, the scientists who worked on the Manhattan Project, many of them said they cultivated inspiration from religion and from philosophy, completely outside the bound of physics, but it got their brain a-jogging, you know?
So I'd love to talk to you about religion and just like where you think that fits into a functioning
We should
society.
definitely talk about religion. This would be really, really interesting. Why don't we do this? We'll move to the members only segment.
Okay.
We'll focus on religion. And for everybody who super chatted, I know I really wish I could get to every single question and comment, but when we ask a question and you guys have that debate, that's the point of this. So, I try to do as many as we could. And
I do like talking.
I just thought it was better to let you guys talk instead of constantly trying to just cut off the actual discussion and the flow thing. So my apologies to everybody. We are going to now have another conversation, which I don't believe will be up by 11 p.m. this time because debating religion, I absolutely love the religious conversations we've had on this show on Timcast IRL. So it'll be
my
at
favorite.
timcast.com. Smash that like button, subscribe to this channel, share the show with your friends. And do you guys want to shout? You can follow us at Timcast IRL. You can follow me at Timcast. Do you guys want to mention any social media stuff?
If you guys could subscribe to the YouTube channel and hit the bell, we'd be blessed by that. And also check out rumble.com so you don't get censored. rumbld.com.
My name is Vaush, and I'm on YouTube. That's VAUSH. I don't know. Thank you. Get your vaccination and vote Biden for more censorship to add to expand upon the
Don't do
existing.
Talk to
make
your
make good decisions.
Make good decisions. Yeah.
Yeah, there you
Talk
go.
to your doctor about what's right for you. Don't take
seriously.
medical opinions from people on the
Of
internet.
course.
but-
Talk to your
Side
doctor
effects
about
may
voting for
include-
Biden.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Hey, depending on where you live, your doctor might say no. So
I love you guys. Thank you for coming. This is great, man. There's a lot of super chats. People are pointing out like they don't even you don't even have to agree with anyone here. Just the fact that we're having conversation is like the spirit of freedom.
I thought it was
It's the
great.
first
I
amendment.
really loved
I
it
love
when you're like
freedom.
naming the philosophers, and then you're like, oh, that was fun. I love that. That was fantastic.
The extra segment, just wait.
Okay. Even if I had a membership, I don't think we can really recast or restream like membership related stuff. In terms of who won, I guess, because that's always what people are interested in. Who won? I mean, it feels like both sides did fine here. I see, looking in from the outside now, I can see the difficulties in like, how do you maintain civility versus adequately challenging the person? Because like, if I were to look at like, did Vaush maintain civility? Like, absolutely. Like it's hard to separate our personal biases out from what a normal person thinks. I try to do that, but it's hard. For some reason, I feel like when Vaush talks, sometimes I get this feeling of like smug liberal. I don't know why, and it's probably not fair. It might just be my perception of him. I don't know if it's the cadence or what, but I always get like, this guy thinks he's such a like elite liberal fuck or whatever. I don't know why. But like in terms of like content, everything they talked about, I think that Vaush did a good job at like not like losing his cool or like being chill. Like I think that was fine. But then on the flip side, I could see people being upset where they're like, he didn't challenge him enough. And I don't know how you balance that, because I'm trying to think like at the end of the day, do I feel like Vaush and Charlie had like substantive disagreements that were ever settled with some sort of prescriptive thing? Like Vaush did push back on things, right? On most things, but like was there actually substantial disagreement? I'm not sure. It's hard. I guess it's hard to tell. Maybe it's like the moving through topics or. I was like, I hate the CRT shit. I actually think that conversation is so fucking boring compared to the vaccine one. It really irritates me that wasn't a longer. It really irritates me that wasn't a longer conversation, but I think he performed poorly on vaccines. I thought all of his counters to the vaccine stuff were pretty on point. I don't think he did poorly in that section at all. I just would have liked to have seen Charlie Kirk like, I guess something that I don't know if it's possible in these conversations. I don't even know if I go for this. I think that it's really valuable if you can get any concession, but I don't think anybody will give a concession to anything. Like it's almost impossible to do, you know? I am so curious how it's so funny to me that the Surfs TV refuses to ever talk to me or debate me again, but he did a debate with JF where he looked horrible, and he's doing a debate now against Lauren Southern where he's gonna look horrible. What the fuck? Really interesting, isn't it? I messaged Hutch to see if he wanted to chat about this, but he's not. I feel like he let Kirk move too much from point to point without making his own dumb arguments. Maybe, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know, it's hard. One thing that's really frustrating in these debates, and I guess, I wonder if I do this too. I have to go back and watch stuff, actually, to figure this out. One thing that annoys me about these debates is that when people are on their own platforms, they'll stake out this position, and they'll stake out this position. But then when they come to have debates, they move to like this position, and then like this position. And then both of them spend time attacking kind of these things, and then saying, well, that's not me. Like, let's all agree here. But it feels like nobody ever brings out. Nobody ever actually brings out the shit that like they really go hard on like their streams and shit. And that kind of irritates me. Because then when both of these guys go back home, they're going to go back to like this extreme shit and then this extreme shit. And then their fans are going to get mad because they're going to be like, Charlie, why were you here and agreeing with this here? And Vaush, why were you here and agreeing with this here? When they, yeah, I don't know. But yeah, I guess, but I don't know. I'd have to think about this. I'd have to think about this a lot. Do you think Kirk has actually read all that philosophy? I'm sure he's read about all that philosophy. I don't know if he's read it. I would be surprised at that, but isn't that natural if they want to bring in more moderates? Yeah, I guess it just depends at the end of the day, like what view you're defending or what your prescription is for anything or what exactly you're pushing for. Because, I mean, like, you can argue that that's a form of, like, meeting people where they're at. But, yeah, I'm not sure. I don't know. Because, like, I'm trying to think, like, is there anything that, like, is there anything that Vaush said that I feel like he has a more radical position on that he wouldn't actually own? I don't think in the CRT or the vaccine debate. I'm not too sure if there was. Maybe it's just the types of issues that end up getting debated are like the ones where they're kind of like more in the middle on. Maybe that's something that sucks about debating like the most inflammatory of issues. Like the CRT stuff has become such a loser red herring shit. It's like BLM riots. It's like such a loser red herring issue. Like just don't defend it. Like dump that shit to the side and don't ever have to like publicly own any of that stupid shit. He allowed Kirk to separate race from the issue like 3 times. Yeah, but I think he also kind of does that too, right? So that's not necessarily like... My problem with Vaush on vaccines wasn't really his fault. It's just that the lack of information he has in the field let Kirk get away with a lot of near disinformation. I feel like Vaush pushed back against almost everything pretty well. What in the fuck is the... Somebody linked this in the chat. What is the Delta variant plus? Oh, God.
Remember to hit that like and subscribe, and don't forget the notification bell so that my videos show up right in your feed.